I'm a real estate agent, fairly new to the job. We're currently repping a house on behalf of the bank. The house was handed to me 2 days ago. Sometimes if the previous tenant had died or disappeared, they'll just leave all their belongings behind. I'm something of an amateur historian, so occasionally I go looking through the belongings. Because the property of the bank, anyway, usually come part and parcel with the house. For any new buyers. Yesterday, I was surveying the property and I came across an old notebook, just resting on the desk in a study, right there. As if it wanted me to find it. It didn't look that old. When I opened it, the words inside were written in crayon, clearly in an adult's handwriting. Contents were fairly disturbing. My boss prohibited me from taking it to the police. He says it's fiction. They're wasting my time. Maybe he's right. And as per the instructions in the text, I'm sharing them here just in case. I hope it helps. My name's Chris. I'm 26 years old. I'm a former IT technician. I'm survived by my mom, my dad, my sister, and Buddy, the family dog. I used to have an apartment. I used to have a life. And now I live in her walls. For reasons I won't go into, it made me jobless and homeless. I could have reached out to my family. I should have. But I've always been a stubborn guy, and I wanted to handle this myself. My family aren't exactly rich. I didn't want to be a burden. I'd get back on my feet. It wouldn't be hard. It was harder than I anticipated. Nights of sleeping rough or cowering in a shelter, my bag clutched to my chest out of fear of being shanked by one of the city's more hopeless destitutes. An ache in my body that seeped into my very bones, for which seemingly no warmth could serve as a panacea. An ache I dulled with alcohol and eventually prescription drugs, illicitly obtained from an old wino on 6th Street shelter, though I seemed to have a healthy supply. By the time I was in desperate need of help, I was too far gone to acknowledge it. I spied the house by chance, exploring a new neighborhood for some prospective panhandling. I scoped it out for days. It was an unassuming Victorian townhouse in a good part of the city, a for sale sign swinging old and forgotten in the overgrown yard. White paint, blue trim, lace curtains. Most importantly, a window into the basement that I could easily jimmy. I lurked in the area watching the house. Nobody was coming or going. It was clear to me that nobody lived there, but still, despite my alcohol and drug-addled brain, I was cautious. I made sure. All I wanted was a place to sleep for a few nights. I wasn't going to vandalize the property or steal anything. A warm bed, hopefully running water, a place to recuperate and collect myself away from the comings and goings of others in the same boat as me. Safety, comfort, the temporary illusion of such things. An injection of hope to keep me going. As I slid through the basement window on that fateful Friday night, hope was on my mind. This could be the turning point for me. Collect myself, get healthy, move on with the owners none the wiser. Maybe finally reach out to my family. Hope. It's what I felt as I dropped onto that bare concrete floor, my eyes adjusting to the cellar dark. Hope. The house doesn't represent hope. It's a place where hope comes to die. Upstairs, every surface was coated in a thin layer of dust. Nothing severe, but enough to tell me that my suspicions were correct. The house was empty. It was decorated like your standard townhouse, old-fashioned furniture perhaps from the 60s. Beige carpets, knickknacks in the living room, Locked door downstairs led to a study, perhaps. A grandfather clock stood in the hall, silent, unwound. My feet squeaked over the tiled floors as I headed towards the stairs, and I winced at the sound even knowing I was alone. The house felt empty. An old, musty smell wafted through the rooms, the ghost of an older inhabitant, perhaps, which hadn't been aired since they departed. Had they left of their own volition? Had they died? Something tells me the latter. But even the prospect that they might have expired in the house didn't sway me. My legs ached, my head hurt. I needed my pills, and I needed rest. Upstairs promised a bed, a soft mattress, respite. The master bedroom had all the trappings of a his and hers cohabitation. A king-size double bed took up most of the room, opposite which I spied a built-in wardrobe into which I peered. An old lady's dresses, old man's suits, hanging mothballs from hangers, smelling faintly of mildew. I noticed a hatch at the back of the wardrobe, which I figured must have led to further storage space. A vanity table sat by one window, a chest of drawers on the opposite wall. The small bedside clock worked, thankfully, and I could see it was nearly midnight. I could explore the rest of the house tomorrow. Right then, I needed rest. Suddenly and absolutely. I collapsed onto the bed. So soft. Softer than I'd felt in months. Just before I drifted off into a dreamless sleep, it struck me that I hadn't seen a single photograph in the house, not framed on a mantel or hanging on the walls. It wasn't too strange, I thought. The previous occupants must have taken them. My brain, sleep-deprived, didn't consider the fact they'd taken nothing else. I awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows. I felt rested, recovering, and yet strangely alert, on edge, wary. Had something woken me? It took just a second to realize what. From outside of the room I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, and then a cheerful humming. The voice sounded feminine, old. Shit. Had the old lady really come back suddenly? Of all the awful luck, I panicked, scrambling out of bed, eyes darting around the room. I couldn't leave. Lord knows where she was in the house. Sure, I likely could overpower an old woman, but there was no way I was doing that unless I absolutely had to. I'm not a monster. I remember the crawl space in the built-in wardrobe. It seemed as good an option as any. I darted to it, pulled it open. A cavernous black space loomed beyond. Without thinking, I pulled shut the wardrobe door behind me and slipped into the darkness. The area I found myself in was cold. I was pressed up against the brickwork, pinned in a claustrophobic corridor between the walls. I stood there for a moment, catching my breath, trying to calm my nerves, then settled down, a dappling of light a few feet away. The vent, looking into the bedroom. At over 6 feet tall, I was barely able to peer through it. The door to the bedroom opened and an old woman entered. I say old, she was ancient, a withered, round-shouldered crone, who shuffled in, peering around with beady eyes. Her face wrinkled like a prune, twitched as if she was sniffing the air. And all the while, a beautiful, melodic hum emanated from her lips. The woman moved around the room, tutting at the unmade bed. I hoped she'd forgotten the state in which she'd left it. Then my heart sank. Icy fear gripped my spine. Beside the bed, I saw it, my bag, my worldly possessions, my pills were in there, my booze, my driver's license. Shit! I said a silent prayer that the old woman wouldn't notice. I couldn't afford to be caught. I couldn't. During my homeless days, I'd been arrested twice, once for aggravated assault against a businessman in a bar who provoked me and looked presentable enough for the law to come down on his side, despite witness testimony. once for public drunkenness. I managed to avoid jail time, but I knew if I got caught breaking and entering, that'd be it. They'd lock me up. I wouldn't go to jail. I couldn't. I almost wept with relief as the old woman turned away from the side of the bed on which my bag rested. She shuffled out of view towards the vent I stood behind. Her humming drifted up into the walls, haunting and soothing. Then the notes began to transform, shifting into a cruel, cackling laugh. I held firm, heart pounding my chest. There was no way that little old lady could have seen me in the vent. No way. With a shriek, her withered old face appeared in front of me, staring directly through the vent, over 6 feet high. Her eyes, yellowing, were wide and malevolent, her mouth split open in a rictus grin, revealing a smattering of rotten teeth. She shrieked and howled, eyes locked onto mine gleefully. I stumbled backwards in as little space as I had, cracking my skull against the brickwork behind me. Somewhere to my right, I heard a loud metallic slam. The air tasted suddenly too thin, too clogged with brick dust. I had to get out of there. I no longer cared about overpowering the old crone. I'd risk it. I stumbled back to the crawlspace door. I pushed on it. Unyielding metal met my touch. I shoved harder, my shoulders meeting brick. Unable to get a good purchase. Nothing. "Let me out," I called. "Please!" The old woman replied, her voice muffled by the walls. "Welcome home, my baby." The words chilled me. They were so emotionless, so rasping, and yet within them dripped a malice I could yet barely comprehend. I explored the inside of those walls for 3 whole days. There was no way in or out save for that immovable crawlspace door through which I'd entered. It soon became clear to me that the house had been designed so that passage inside the walls was possible. To get between floors, there were vertical shafts lined with metal rungs. 3 accessible floors, I discovered. I couldn't reach the basement via the walls, but I could freely explore the first floor as well as the second floor at which I'd entered. Then there was the attic. After a day of searching, of screaming, of tracking the old woman between rooms only to be ignored every time, I poked my head out of the shaft leading to the top floor. Here I found a larger open space almost fit for human habitation. Filthy mattress lay in one corner, sand sheets or bedding. In the other was a toilet, also filthy, but fully functional. A journal, oddly new, dust-free, settled on the mattress alongside a pack of crayons. The floor, made of bricks, looked recently swept. The old woman had clearly been here at some point in the recent past. I looked around for another entrance. There was none. This meant the old crone had crawled through the walls herself to get here. While searching for an exit, I made a grisly discovery. In an alcove high up on the wall, 3 skulls sat leering down at me. Hesitantly, I reached out for one, looking for something, anything I could use as a tool, a means of escape. The skulls were cemented in place. They felt like a message. Two further days passed, during which time I slept on the dirty mattress, in between searching desperately for an escape. I was starving, thirsty, delirious from malnutrition, dehydration, and fear. Every time I slid through the walls, I felt the brick pressing down on my chest as if the house itself was squeezing the life from me. On the 3rd day, Throat dry and hoarse from screaming, I made my way down to the kitchen vent and saw the old woman preparing a bloody meal at the counter. Strands of stringy meat parted under her large, gleaming knife. I eyed the blade with longing, unsure what I could achieve with it. Nevertheless, the weight of the knife in my hand would have made me feel better. Instead, I begged for food and water. The old woman looked up at the vent and gave me a smile, her teeth stained with blood, as she chewed on a raw cut of the meat. I caught sight of the garbage can and saw what looked like a cat's tail hanging over the edge. My gorge rose in my throat, and I stifled a cry as all the while hunger bubbled in my belly. "Please, I need to eat," I croaked. The old woman scuttled towards me and momentarily disappeared out of my sight. When her face appeared in the vent, I was too tired and drained to even react. I had no idea how she'd gotten up so high. A chair positioned beneath, maybe. The whole process had been silent, or perhaps in my state I simply just hadn't noticed. "I'll feed you, Babby," the old woman said, and I let out a cry of relief and thanks. "But no, you listen," she went on. "I'll feed you, but only if you're good. No funny business, Babby, you hear? 'Cause I know. I'll know. You go up to your bedroom like a good little girl, and I'll ring the bell for you. Come to the door in the bedroom, and nice treats will await. Understand, Babby?" I didn't have the energy to question her, or ask why she was calling me a good little girl, or back-chat in any way. I simply nodded, sniffled back tears, and began the long crawl back to my room. The old woman kept her promise, and when a tinkling bell echoed through the interior of the house, I made my way down to the metal door and found a steaming plate of cooked meat waiting for me. My stomach ached, and I was too ravenous to think too hard about it. I wolfed it down on the spot, swigging from the plastic water bottle beside it. The routine continued for a week. My body felt like it was atrophying. The withdrawal symptoms from the alcohol and pills had kicked in full force now, and simply dragging myself up and down the shafts was an effort I could rarely expend. Mostly I laid retching in my filthy attic room, emerging only to retrieve the daily meals the old crone provided. After several days, my strength felt like it was returning, and I decided to wait by the metal door, hoping I could surprise the old woman when she came to feed me. She never came. Nor did she come for the next 3 days. "Your punishment, Babby," she crowed from the study when I tracked her there, begging and pleading. She barely even looked up from the old book she was examining. I never tried that again. Instead, I began to chronicle my experiences in the journal. This seemed to please the old woman, despite my lack of mentioning the procedure, and I was granted a little more food and 2 bottles of water a day. I kept writing after that, and I'm up to date now. Yesterday, I awoke in fear from a particularly restful deep sleep. I was sure somebody else was in my room. I scrambled up the mattress, croaking in fear and warning. In the darkness, I could make out a pink shape in the corner. As sleep slipped away and my night vision returned, I could make out what it was. A dress. I walked over to it hesitantly. "For my pretty little girl," a note read, in elaborate cursive. I looked down at the dress. My own clothes were filthy, stained with dirt, dust, God knows what else. They itched. They felt disgusting. My beard, which had grown busy and unruly, itched too. My hair felt greasy and vile. A change of clothes, at the very least, would have been welcome, but this was preposterous. The idea of wearing a pink woman's dress felt degrading. I ignored the gift, kicking it angrily into the corner. Later, I found myself spying on the bathroom. I'd previously always avoided that room after checking earlier on for viable exit routes. The last thing I wanted to see was the old bat showering. That day, though, simply staring longingly at the clean, tiled bathroom was a luxury that I decided to allow myself. To my horror, the old woman entered, thankfully fully dressed. She didn't look up at me as she proceeded to clean the sink. "You're not wearing your present," she said, her back to me, her voice gentle with an air of menace. How the hell did she even know? She could only see my face through the vent, and she hadn't even looked at me. My head swam with anger. "Fuck your present!" I knew as soon as I said it, that was a mistake. The old woman whirled around, her face contorted into a wrinkled ball of malice. "Babby, I will not tolerate that language," she croaked. "You're a bad, disgusting girl, and I'm starting to regret ever allowing you into my home." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I'm awful. I'm a terrible house guest. You throw me out. Let me go. Okay, I won't tell anyone. I won't. I'm too ashamed at what a bad guest I've been. I'll just go get out of your life and leave you in peace." The crone threw her head back, let out a shrill, hooting cackle. "Boy, Babby thinks I'm soft in the head," she exclaimed, to nobody in particular. "Some senile old bat, I'll tell you, you little brat. Our current president is Trump. It's August 2017. The sky is blue, the grass is green, and my name is..." She paused, and I waited with bated breath. I learned absolutely nothing about my captor. If I could call her by her name, maybe that would shift the power balance at least slightly. "You almost got me," she honked. Anyway, Babby, if you don't like your gift, maybe I'll find someone who will." The idea of having company, as macabre and selfish as it was, gave me a spike of optimism. Perhaps with two of us, escape would be more forthcoming. I live in her walls. I live in her walls, and I need to get out. The weeks passed since my last entry. I've been too afraid to write, too afraid to let my guard down. She's in every room now. Everywhere I go, she's there, humming and guffawing and staring at me, her face pressed to the vent, impossibly high. Her eyes grow more deranged by the day. It's like she's excited, like she's waiting for something. I need to get out. Things have been strange in the house lately, too. Stranger than usual. I keep hearing other voices emanating from the rooms, but when I make my way to them, it's only the old woman there. But I definitely hear others, men, women, children. Something's going on in the house. It's maddening. Always just out of my line of sight, always moving when I chase it down. The rooms are changing, too, I think. I found myself inside the walls of a room I'm sure I've never seen before. Perhaps it was the basement. Perhaps I got down there without realizing it. It's a large room lit by candles, decorated with black drapes. There's a table in the middle. I don't know what's on it. I can't quite see. The old woman wasn't in that room, but nevertheless, I was sure I wasn't alone. I thought I could hear breathing deep and heavy just below the grate. I scrambled away, pulling myself through the tight gaps. Somehow I found the route back to my room. It took hours. I got lost inside the bricks of this infernal house. I'm scared to explore further. I'm scared of where I might end up. The walls are closing in on me. The house feels like it's getting tighter around me. She stopped feeding me. I haven't eaten or drank in 5 days. I could barely move. It's all I could do to muster the strength to leave these final words should my words be found along with my body. I need the finder to make them public. I need my mom and my dad and my sister to know that I didn't abandon them. I need you to warn them never to enter this house. I need to be able to move. I need strength. Because I'm not alone anymore. I can hear them creeping through the tunnels, sliding through the gaps, getting closer. I live in her walls, and there's someone living in her walls with me. So, there you go. I don't like being in this house anymore. I called up the bank. I asked how the property came into their possession. The old woman who owned it died, they said. She died years and years ago, mired in debts. Lost her daughter and her husband. It was the beginning of the end. Somehow the property got lost in the system. Only recently the bank discovered it was their asset. I checked in that wardrobe, of course. No crawl space there, just a blank, solid wall. And I keep trying to dismiss the notebook. The flight of fancy, a story planted there for someone's amusement, a prank on the new girl, my boss's behalf, maybe. But I've been in that house a lot these last 2 days, preparing it for sale, and every time I'm there, I hear scratching in the walls. I hear movement. I keep feeling like I'm being watched from the vents that line every room. I hate being there. The walls feel like they're closing in. I mean, I'm in the house now, in fact, finishing up before I leave for the day, and I can hear movement in the walls again. I keep telling myself it's rats. It's just rats. But it doesn't sound like rats. I think I need to leave. I first heard of the hidden portrait of Sir Isaac Whitmore during my earlier years. At the time, I was living at our ancestral family home of Dustwall Manor, located in the tender Welsh countryside. It was my grandfather, my only living relative, who related the story to me. Not much is known about our family's famed progenitor, but supposedly, deep within Dustwall Manor, a room exists, the study of Sir Isaac Whitmore, and in it hangs the sole existing portrait of the man. I never learned of the authenticity of this story, this rumor, for I was never able to roam the seamlessly endless halls of Dustwall Manor unsupervised. Too big was the chance for a young child to get lost in its winding labyrinthian hallways. My grandfather was a studious man, a scholar, but also a hermit, who chose to spend his remaining years at Dustwall Manor. After my mother's death and childbirth, he'd taken my upbringing and early education upon himself. He instructed me on such subjects as history, mythology, and philosophy, but also hinted at other more secretive studies he partook in. Yet, he'd also share many a tale relating to our family and, of course, the story of Sir Isaac's portrait. Once I was of suitable age, he sent me off to the grand city of London, where I first attended a prestigious boarding school and, eventually, the King's College, London, all paid for by our family's lavish fortune. My first field of choice was that of history, an interest brought forth by my grandfather's many tales. After only a few semesters, however, I moved on to the study of contemporary politics, driven by an ever-growing, almost unconscious need to understand the workings of our modern world. While I analyzed the workings of the world at large, I grew more and more interested in the smaller picture of my very own family line. As a pastime, a hobby, really, I set out to complete a family tree of the Whitmore line, something no one had ever attempted, at least if I were to trust my grandfather's words. This endeavor of mine, however, seemed to be doomed from its outset, and even after I'd consulted the vast archives in London, I was only able to put together a rough patchwork of unrelated names and lost relatives. As I'd learned from my grandfather, the Whitmore family was a secluded one. Always had been, and many of his members had preferred to hide away from the world and spend their entire existence deep within the secure walls of Dustwall Manor. Even those who'd venture forth into the world driven by their own ambitions or in search of adventure would ultimately, and without fail, return to the manor. It should be the same for me. Upon graduation, I took up a position as a teaching assistant, but my heart never belonged to the grand capital. Instead, I longed to return to the ancient walls of Dustwall Manor. With each passing year, I felt less at home in London. It was loud, dirty, and a crowded city, one teeming with people, a city that never slept, an ever-changing beast of the mundane, social merriment, and overindulgence. The longer I suffered through its wakefulness, its wastefulness, the more I longed for the stillness and comfortable melancholia I'd so felt from the steadfast walls of my home. I felt, frankly, different from other people, like a different breed, and so, in the third decade of my life, I decided to leave the grand capital behind and return home. I'd not visit the manor since my grandfather had sent me off to a boarding school, not even upon his death, honoring his last wish to focus on my studies and not a secluded old man. Yet I remembered the way without fail. Knew exactly which of the small winding country roads to take, treating the car's navigation system as nothing more than a voice of whispered reinforcements. Eventually I could make out the towering Gothic spires that form the heart of Dustwall Manor on the distant horizon. When I laid eyes upon them, the strangest of feelings washed over me. A feeling that was more than simple nostalgia, for it felt almost like a presence was calling out to me, as if the manor itself was alive, and had, for all those years, waited for me to return. Dustwall Manor was a place of architectural madness, and I only now realized how truly monstrous its dimensions were. It was a gigantic construction that had been ever extended, comprising dozens of buildings, wings, and endless rooms all interconnected, an amalgamation of centuries' worth of mortar and brick. Its heart was a magnificent example of Gothic architecture, giving the entire building a feeling of excessive antiquity, and making entry into the grand vestibule feel like you'd set foot in an ancient cathedral. Its wings, which had been added over the course of centuries, were a tour de force of Europe's architectural greatness. The Gothic gave way to the pillars, domes, and columns of the Renaissance, reminiscent of classic antiquity, before those were overtaken by the grander, more excessive style of the Baroque, which was replaced in turn by the purity and authenticity of the neoclassical. Only the newest additions to the manor were held in the more modern and contemporary styles of the current day. While many of the manor's distant and forgotten wings were covered in fungi and long vines, none of the manor's walls showed signs of damage. None of the many distant and half-forgotten wings had collapsed. Now there were no sign of dilapidation, decay amongst the entirety of the manor. How this was possible was yet another mystery amongst a sheer endless number surrounding it, as well as my family. As I stared at these bleak, century-old walls, at the giant, watchful eye-like windows, at its almost unnerving patchwork architecture, I was flooded with a feeling of deep nostalgia. I so longed for this place, and now I knew I was finally and forever home. When I set foot in the building's grand vestibule, I felt small, almost like I was a child again, pushed back to my early years when the proportions of the manor had seemed unreal and scary. Many long hallways reminiscent of gaping maws ready to swallow me up. Even now it felt as if the manor's interior dimensions, as ridiculous as it sounds, dwarfed even its gigantic interior. From the grand vestibule, a wide hallway stretched on and led deeper into the manor, connecting it to its Gothic heart. but also the various wings and other hallways snaking their way through the building. As I followed this hallway, my eyes wandered over its excessive design and the many lavish decorations. I remembered now that this hallway was not merely an entryway, but so much more. My footsteps echoed on the polished marble floor. My hands glided gently over the many tapestries adorning the mighty walls. They depicted iconic scenes from the Bible, showcased creatures from mythology, and even famous historical events. Their composition and make is different as the manor's architecture. Some were centuries old. Their fibers stiff and hardened, their colors phased, while others were in almost pristine condition. They all painted a histogram of colors, threads, stitches of various kinds. The upper part of the walls were adorned with costly hardwood paneling, coated with gold leaf and other similarly costly materials. And finally, above it all, loomed the hallway's high, intricately carved ceiling, forming a net of the most complicated art full of hidden details, their meaning lost through the passage of time. Here and there I found alcoves presenting trophies and artifacts brought back by those members of the Whitmore family line who'd ventured out into the world. Venetian masks were propped up next to knightly armor. Statues and figures created by Italian sculptors were accompanied by delicate German woodcuttings. Yet there were many other, more exotic items to behold. African stone carvings, tribal masks, clay tablets, Mesopotamian vases, and Asian weaponry. It was a showcasing, a testament to the lives lived in Dustwall Manor of people's occupation and ambitions. This all added to the building's general atmosphere. Dustwall Manor was an old place, a musty and antique one, but most of all, a lonely one. For it seemed I was the only person who'd set foot into these ancient walls ever since my grandfather's passing. All these decorations, these trophies and artifacts, however, gave it a strange sort of vitality. I'd only set foot in this hallway a few select times, and always accompanied by my grandfather. Now for the first time I was able to truly experience it, to truly absorb it all. And I was utterly overwhelmed. After what felt like hours, and after I'd satisfied my curiosity, my nostalgia drove me back to my grandfather's former living quarters in the manor's most eastward wings. It was one of the newest additions to the building, commissioned by no other than my grandfather himself at his return to the manor. My grandfather's lodgings were sparsely furnished, and an expression of his hermit lifestyle. No tapestries hung against the walls, no carpets covered the cold marble floor. Instead, there was a stark functionality to it all. Every item had its function and was meticulously placed. It didn't matter if it was his reading chair next to the fireplace, the workbenches, which hinted at the hidden act of alchemy, a special interest of his, or the books in his small but dedicated library. While I could have chosen any other part of the manor, rooms much more lavishly furnished, it was here I felt most at home. It wasn't merely feelings of nostalgia, though, for I, too, had grown weary of the outside world, and of interacting with people, and over the years had taken on similar characteristics to those that had so marked my grandfather. After I'd settled in, I decided to continue my work on the Whitmore family tree. During my years in London, when this newest interest was first born, I'd never found much time to truly indulge in it. But out here in Dustwall Manor, it felt I'd all the time in the world. I planned to record not merely who made up our family line, but also add my ancestors' various travels, works, and achievements, and all the fields in which the Whitmore name had left its mark, however minuscule they may be. I spent days sifting through my grandfather's personal library. While I found many an old tome to marvel at, there were scarcely a mention of the Whitmore name in any of them. Only a handful of books written by members of the family were cramped between other more important works, almost as if placed as an afterthought. One was written by an Isabella Whitmore, and comprised roughly 24 melancholistic poems, authored by the woman herself. Another had the title De Feto Animalium. It was nothing but a long-winded thesis on the breeding of domesticated animals. The rest were similarly uninteresting and ultimately meaningless in the grander scope of my project. Before long, I ventured forth into the depths of Duskmoor Manor, for my grandfather had spoken to me of other quarters similar to his, which had been left undisturbed for years. Whenever he'd talk of them, he was with a certain reservedness of character. The manor was too big. It had become a beast too sprawling to ever take stock of, and there seemed to be an unspoken rule to leave those lodgings as they were, to serve as memorials of their former inhabitants' existences in this earth. Many of them, however, had gathered knowledge and books of their own, and my grandfather had often partaken on those small enclaves of knowledge, and on special occasions even stolen away with a book or two. Whenever I set out on those long, solitary walks through the manor's seemingly endlessly winding guts, I was filled with an unredeemed dreariness of thought. All of these hallways, all these rooms, they were covered in dust, cobwebs, filled with nothing but memories of people long gone, people who'd once lived here and were now entirely forgotten. All this filled me with what I can only refer to as a melancholistic loneliness. For these old, gigantic walls that made up Duskmoor Manor were filled with an oppressive stillness, an almost constricting emptiness, an emptiness that you could almost feel. I couldn't help but wonder if my grandfather and those before him had felt the same thing as they wandered the manor. From the books I found and consulted during these walks, I slowly learned more about Sir Isaac Whitmore. The man was born in the middle of the 15th century, supposedly in the county of Herefordshire. He was a man of many talents, and even more ventures, an explorer, treasure hunter, and scholar. He amassed a massive fortune over his life and eventually constructed the heart of what should one day become known as Dustwall Manor. The stories of the man's life were many, and as colorful and different as the number of books that I consulted. Some were diaries written by distant ancestors of mine, others were books entirely unrelated to the man's life. It mentioned his influence, deeds, and footnotes, written on yellowed pages and scribbled between the lines. It was said that in his younger years, Sir Isaac Whitmore became involved in the War of the Roses and was a secret confidant of the House of York. During the final years of the conflict, however, he set out on long travels, following in the footsteps of such legendary figures as Marco Polo. Ibn Battuta, partaking in vast journeys along the Silk Road, joining explorers in the heart of Africa, and supposedly even accompanying Christopher Columbus on his final voyage to the New World. It was these travels that eventually allowed him to take control of certain sectors of British trade and come to vast riches. How many of these stories are true and how many are nothing but fables and exaggerations, I wasn't able to ascertain, but they were enough to paint a rough picture of the man and our family's lines of origin. In all these books, however, I never found a description, much less a portrait of the man. The only thing mentioned was the same rumor my grandfather had shared with me, that somewhere, deep within Dustwall Manor, lay Sir Isaac Whitmore's old study, and in it, the sole existing portrait of his likeness. In the weeks to come, I made substantial progress in my endeavor and steadily filled out the Whitmore family tree. What was originally nothing but a patchwork of a few select names finally took shape. As the work neared completion, however, I felt more and more drawn to the secrets of the manor itself. I began to take exhaustive walks through its endless hallways. It had been nothing but mild curiosity and had served the purpose of learning more about the many members of my family, soon became a sort of meditative obsession. Many times, without knowing why, I found I'd left my notes and quarters behind, and half in thought had begun on yet another excursion through a certain distant wing. My head filled with thoughts about Sir Isaac's life and his mysterious study. Before long, these walks grew not only in frequency, but also in length. On certain days, I found myself spending almost all my walking hours wandering and deep in thought, and slowly, ever so slowly, my obsession grew, became a hot, almost burning desire. Wherever I went, however much I walked, I found no hint of the fabled study. Deep inside, I'd half hoped, half expected to eventually traverse the manor in its entirety and stumble upon it by accident, but the manor proved much larger than I'd imagined. With each walk, with each day, I found more hallways, more rooms, found myself in entirely new areas, apartments and wings, places hidden away which I'd never known existed. Eventually, out of desperation, I decided to consult the manor's floor plans. It became evident that I wasn't the first who'd attempted to make sense of the labyrinthian monstrosity that was Dustwall Manor. An almost innumerable amount of floor plans of varying degree and make existed. Some were delicate, the work of studied man, others shoddy and hand-drawn. Some resembled ever-growing patchworks as if they were the effort of multiple people continued throughout the generation. The works of fevered insanity. They differed widely, at times made no sense, at others included hidden rooms and secret wings that didn't exist. It was nothing but purest madness, and yet I was driven by the single purpose of making sense of it all. Even amongst those floor plans, however, I soon realized there was no hint of Sir Isaac's study, and I began to wonder if it truly existed. Yet my obsession never waned, the burning desire never left me, and if anything, seemed to grow ever stronger, and soon affected me not only during the day, but also the night, for I became haunted by dreams of the strangest sort. In them I was walking through a grand structure, a hall wider than any I'd encountered in the manor. Its ceiling was high and arched, its walls covered in innumerable doorways, giving them the appearance of a crazed honeycomb. Whenever I turned to look into these doorways, I bore witness to strange, ungodly things. Some led into dark, looming corridors, others into rooms which I saw performances of forbidden rituals, the work of sorcerers and magic, of alchemy and other disciplines of the occult. I even saw what I assumed to be chambers of torture, filled with flesh and blood, in which creatures not entirely human were born, these twisted creations roaming the most distant of the dark corridors, being forever twisted and ruined, perpetually broken. Only the echo of their miserable cries evidenced their existence. Nonetheless, it was a place of wonder, and its results, as ghastly and abominable as they were magnificent and awe-inspiring. The ends of the dreams were always the same, however. After traversing the grand hall for what felt like an eternity, I found myself in front of a grand arched entryway. This arch, I knew, led into a single room, a mad construction, an amalgamation of all things wrong on this earth, a room grander even than this hall, the study of no other than Sir Isaac Whitmore. Yet I was never able to set foot inside. For the moment I laid eyes upon the structure, I always awoke, shivering and covered in a cold sweat. These dreams unnerved me more than anything, for I wondered why my mind conjured up these ghastly visions and how they came to haunt me every night without fail. Their effect on me was a noticeable one, for I began to suffer from increased superstition of the old walls and what lay beyond them, of what lay in the unexplored depths of Dustwall Manor, and each week, with each day, the feeling seemed to increase and spread over my consciousness like a shroud of purest darkness. Even worse, with each night, the dreams grew more vivid, more detailed, and my knowledge of the abominable hall and its many adjacent rooms and dark corridors grew even deeper. In one dream, I heard prayers in a language older than any known to man, partook in a strange scrying, and even hours after waking up, I shuddered at the outlandish and otherworldly things revealed there. In another one, I bore witness to the creation of what I came to call flesh constructs. They were meticulously formed from the meat of different animals, combined and brought to life by arcane incantations, created from human beings, their bodies first torn apart, then fused together again in ways much too different from what they once were. I even caught glimpses of the secret arts of alchemy used to turn metal into gold, of the growing of mandragoras, and concoctions so weird their effects defied my understanding. Sometimes when I awoke from those dreams, I felt something that differed from the usual terror, for it was replaced by the strangest feeling of familiarity, as if I'd walked those halls before, during my waking hours. I'd long considered those dreams nothing but twisted interpretations of my long walks through Dustmore Manor, warped and skewed by my innermost fears and worries, a byproduct of my ever-growing obsession. These feelings of familiarity, however, even as the dreams grew worse, I never gave up on my work, continued consulting floor plans, continued traversing Dustwall Manor, and slowly my knowledge of my old ancestral family home expanded. First only in the most minute ways, but before long, bit by bit, the manor's complicated layout became clear to me. With it, more and more details of what my grandfather had told me returned to me. It felt as if I was leafing through a hidden tome, and with each day I was able to turn to a new page and read yet another paragraph. I remember my grandfather telling me that Sir Isaac's study wasn't merely a random location within Dustwall Manor, but supposedly its very center, its foundation, and only reachable if you walked in the footsteps of the man himself and made their way to these very first rooms. As I slaved away, I realized that while many of the floor plans differed wildly, certain rooms, corridors, and wings were always there, always the same. By slowly combining them, stacking all their mad details on top of one another, I knew somehow a way through this mad labyrinth would reveal itself, and with it, a path that would lead me to Sir Isaac's study. It was trial and error, sheer insanity. I only took breaks to eat and rest. I drew endlessly, created my very own floor plans only to reject them again for an abundance of errors. And eventually, after how many weeks or months, I can't say, I succeeded in what I'd set out to do. What I stared at was a shoddy, hand-drawn creation of my very own, covered in notes and ramblings and filling almost the entirety of the floors of my meager quarters. But just as I'd thought, as I'd known, I'd found a singular path that snaked itself through the manor and reached what I could only assume to be its center. I set out almost immediately, driven half mad and wanting to prove that the study was just that, a room, a study, one that couldn't be more different from the ghastly dreams that so haunted me, and dispel these strange nocturnal illusions once and for all. I set out, flashlight in hand. I soon left the well-known hallways behind and instead followed constricted corridors, went up and down staircases, entered hidden rooms, and opened secret doors. It felt like I was traveling back in time as everything surrounding me grew older the further I progressed. At first, the path led me through rooms of contemporary and modern design, but I soon entered those of an older kind, neoclassical, Baroque furnishings, before finally ones that reminded me of the interior of Gothic castles, all while normal lamps and light bulbs were slowly replaced by oil lamps, candles, even old fireplaces covered in the dust of centuries. After what felt like days, or indeed centuries, traveled back in time, I finally made it to a room that appeared older than even the oldest parts of the manor itself. It was entirely unimpressive. Nothing but a small, crowded chamber. But its back wall comprised nothing but a heavy, giant, and heavily ornate hardwood door. It was covered in a variety of delicate carvings. Creatures of mythology held sway over one side, while the other was covered in biblical scenes. Yet between them I spied creatures much different, twisted, abominable beings hidden in the background, a mockery to the otherwise grand design, as if something older and darker was lurking behind the oh-so-common iconography. When I tried to open this door, I first thought it securely locked, before I realized just how heavy this age-old gate truly was. With all the force I could muster, grunting, panting, and cursing, I finally cracked it open and was instantly assaulted by stale, moist air thicker than any that I'd encountered before. It wafted from the doorway as thick as fog, and like pestilent vapors spread sluggishly over the room's floor. It was an air full of the smell of old age, the passage of centuries, but also pregnant with an indescribable, otherworldly vileness. I pushed myself past the door's heavy wood, ready to set foot into Sir Isaac's study and to finally lay eyes on the man's fabled portrait. What I found instead, however, were the first steps of an old spiral staircase that led down into the depths of the earth. For a moment I stared at these stairs and the looming darkness that lay beyond, but then, driven by an almost unnatural sense of curiosity, I began my descent. For a moment, I stared at these stairs and the looming darkness that lay beyond, but then, driven by an almost unnatural sense of curiosity, I began on my descent. The stairs were old, ancient even, carved from stone, and were covered in thick moss and heavy perspiration. As I followed them round and round and round, I began to wonder just how far below the earth they'd led. Once more, the memory of those terrible dreams assaulted me, but I told myself that they were nothing but nonsense, flight of the imagination. Those stairs here, all they did was to lead me to yet another hidden chamber, a basement study or something akin to it. Yet they continued on endlessly, and as minutes turned to what felt like hours, my fears slowly returned. It felt like I wasn't merely descending to the hidden depths of Dustwall Manor, but to hell itself. Before long, however, all those fears, all those worries were pushed aside by a rising feeling of euphoria. This was what I'd been looking for. This was what all these fevered months of study had been for, and what held the secrets I so desperately craved. This obsession of mine, when had it started? I thought back to my arrival at Dustwall Manor, to my time in London, my education at the boarding school, and I realized that in one way or another, it had always lurked in the back of my mind, lying dormant and hidden. Ever since I had heard those tales from my grandfather, I'd longed to learn more about my family line, our ancestral home, and of course, the study of Sir Isaac Whitmore. This longing was the true reason I'd returned home. It wasn't my descent from modern society, and neither was it nostalgia. Goosebumps appeared all over my arms, and I couldn't help but shudder at this newest revelation. It felt almost as if I'd been destined to come here. Had always been destined to find this place, and be here at this very moment. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, a dim light reached me from what was without a doubt the bottom of the stairs. Once I descended these final stairs, I found yet another hardwood door, but one that was slightly cracked, and from this crack, the dim light reached me. Stepping up to it, I reached out for the heavy wood, slowly caressing it and making sure it truly existed before I pushed it open. My eyes grew wide when I saw what was revealed in front of me. It was a grand hall, just like the one I'd seen in those ghastly dreams, one grander than any I'd seen before, be it at Dustwall Manor or even in the grand city of London. It was a monumental construction, as if carved from the guts of the earth itself. The first thing I noticed was an abundance of light sources of all kinds. I saw modern electrical lights, but also oil lamps, candles, a strange mixture of the modern and the old, as if new kinds of technology had simply been added or layered over what was already there, an amalgamation of things past and present. I began to wonder, however, why there was light down here. Who'd turned it on? Who'd lit all those oil lamps and candles? It could only mean that someone else was down here. I shivered. Who might call this ancient, hidden hall their home? My eyes wandered around in search, but I saw no one. The thought of going back to flee, to forget whatever I'd found here, appeared in my mind. Yet this was too strange. But was almost instantly pushed aside by the same fevered obsession that had so driven me these past months. All thoughts of danger were forgotten, and I set out to find what I'd come for: the study of Sir Isaac Whitmore. With each step, the same feeling of familiarity, of recognition came over me, one that only grew in intensity. These walls, the floor, the doorways, the ones that lined the walls, the corridors they led to. I'd seen it all before, but not just in those terrible dreams. I stared at the impossibility in front of me, no, all around me, staring at what I still believed, hoped, to be a flight of fancy, a demon of the imagination. And if I'd only wait, it'd be replaced by reality, and show me where I'd really found my way to. However much I waited, though, nothing changed. The grand hall stayed as it was, and I finally had to admit that this place was real. This place was the same one I'd seen in all those ghastly dreams. Yet what actually was this place? Why was it? I was torn from my thoughts when I noticed movement to my left. A figure, its features hidden under a heavy shroud, had appeared at a doorway to my right and came rushing towards me. I reeled back in terror, raising my arms, ready to defend myself from whatever this was. Yet the figure paid me no heed, hurried past me and entered another doorway, where it vanished into the looming darkness that lay ahead. For a moment I was too stunned to do anything, and all I was able to do was to stare after it, waiting for its return. Yet the figure was simply gone. Then I began to wonder about something else. If the dreams were indeed true, then what about all these abominable horrors, deeds that I witnessed? Did it mean those two were real? Once more, the impossible situation I found myself in came crashing down on me, and what little remained of the man who'd once lived in London screamed at me to abandon this crazed need for answers. Yet those were the words of a sane man, and I wasn't truly sane anymore. Hadn't been in weeks, months, maybe even years. It felt like I was barely in control of my body as I sat out again and ventured deep into the hall. My footsteps echoed endlessly on the cold, hard stone floor, their echoes traveling ahead of me and intruding deep in the distant dark corridors all around me. Every once in a while, however, there were more distant sounds reaching me. They originated from deep inside those looming dark corridors, sounding like moans and groans. I shuddered when I saw shuffling shadows. I couldn't help but imagine them, but to be the flesh constructs that I'd bore witness to in my dreams. Twisted things created down here, things made of wet flesh and torn skin, doomed for all eternity and left alone in nothing but their misery, suffrage and pain. Before long, I saw more of the shrouded figures, but they too ignored me and hurried past me undeterred. Dozens, if not hundreds of them, were down here, feverishly working on something. In a trance, my eyes trailed after them, and I noticed just how much of their forms differed. Some seemed normal enough, their proportions human, their movement bipedal. Others, however, were hunched over, much smaller or taller than me, moving on all fours or slithering over the ground like reptiles, their motions jerky and animalistic. Rooms like the ones I'd spied in those ghastly dreams had taken the place of the dark looming corridors. Some seemed to be studies, workstations, reading quarters, but others were just as horrible as those the dreams had shown me. They were drenched in disgusting liquids, filled with twisted altars and abominable horrors. Yet none of them mattered, for I eventually found what I'd been looking for, the study of Sir Isaac Whitmore. Just like in the dreams, I stood in front of a giant arched entryway, but for the first time, I was able to lay eyes upon it, and could step through it, and now saw just how huge, how magnificent the study truly was. The words room or study didn't fit this impossibility at all. It was a work of architectural insanity, a design so grand it made my head hurt. It comprised of what had to be dozens of open layers, all stacked upon one another, connected by a mad network of bridges and stairs, rising further and further upwards, but also down, even deeper into the guts of the earth. Here, too, shrouded figures were everywhere, but their numbers were uncountable. They were standing in front of lecterns and desks, studying ancient tomes, vellums, papyrus, and even stone tablets, or working on complicated machinery and contraptions, or hurrying here and there carrying items as strange as they were outlandish. And this made it seem like I'd intruded on an entire hidden society, a society of the shrouded. Finally, though, I found what I'd been looking for so long. Against the study's back wall, opposite the giant arched entryway, and not hidden behind stairs or bridges, lay the portrait of Sir Isaac Whitmore. The hidden portrait of my family's fabled progenitor. The portrait's size, too, defied all reason. It was tremendous, larger than any portrait or work of art I'd ever laid eyes upon. A grand display, a monument. He was a portrait of a finely clad elderly gentleman, but one that looked almost too mundane, too ordinary to be the basis of so many legends and rumors. As I stared at it, however, it slowly began to change. Colors began running into one another, and the man seemed to move as if alive. No, was warping himself. What was human slowly, ever so slowly, became something entirely different. Arms and legs began to atrophy and were replaced by twisted appendages. The neck seemed to extend, and the head was pushed further and further from its body before it opened up like the bulb of a flower, revealing something horrible within. Even the lower body was transforming, changing state from solid to liquid and finally gaseous, only to become solid again, perpetually shifting. The thing I saw in front of me was a physical impossibility, something that shouldn't exist, couldn't spawn from any earthly imagination. It was a twisted abomination so alien it made my head hurt. The longer I stared, the more horrible and surreal details I noticed. More parts of a grand whole, parts impossible to fathom. I saw mouths, ears, hair, appendages, entire bodies fused together, but eternally apart. Things liquid and gaseous, all forming a creature, an entity, not of this world. Yet as I stared at it, I felt drawn forward, felt an almost obsessive need to bask in its presence, to prostrate myself in front of this ghastly horror, to touch it, to bind my existence to it, and to I see you have arrived after all, Daniel. I suddenly heard a voice from behind me. I jerked up in a shock, but wasn't able to tear my eyes from the ever-shifting painting in front of me. Instead, I could only stand there staring ahead, unable to do anything but listen to the voice from behind me. Yet somehow this voice, it sounded almost familiar. It's remarkable, isn't it? The voice continued. Finally, and with tremendous effort, I was able to open my mouth, able to form words, but could only utter a single question while my eyes were still glued to the impossibility in front of me. What is it? It's what you set out to find. The hidden portrait of Sir Isaac Whitmore. But this thing, Sir Isaac Whitmore was more than a man. Much, much more. He was a being from a different realm. A visitor who took on the guise of man and walked over our world. Yet his true form was too powerful, couldn't be constrained. Eventually, he had to retreat. But the being that was Sir Isaac Whitmore knew there were ways, even if they were difficult, to return in all its glory. So he created all this here, made plans that would eventually allow him, it, to stay in this realm perpetually, to conquer this world, and to make it his. How? I asked in a quivering voice. I felt a hand landing on my shoulder, and finally, I was able to tear my eyes from the gigantic portrait, and as I turned around, I found one of the shrouded figures in front of me. Its entire body was covered by the heavy fabric, and even its face was nothing but a shadow, hidden by the shroud's folds. Come, I'll show you. Now that my attention was fully focused on the mysterious figure, now that I truly listened, I realized why its voice had sounded so familiar. Grandpa? Is that you? But how are you? A sound that might very well have been laughter came from between the folds before the figure began walking, and I, not knowing what else to do, and in need of answers, simply set in after it. We traversed the entire width of the study and eventually ascended one of the many stairs, pushing past other feverishly working shrouded figures. My eyes wandered around, trying to take in, to understand what was happening here, but there was too much going on. Madness, I thought, like an anthill taken over by fevered insanity. He created us, my grandfather continued. These servants are the ones who will eventually create the right conditions for him to return in all his terrifying glory, and without being restricted to the body of man. Before he left, he gave instructions, taught them how to continue the work, and the steps on how to create other similar beings. Those servants, are they our lineage? The Whitmore family? But what do you mean by created? I asked, utterly confused. By now my grandfather had stopped in front of a metal door embedded in the study's wall. Instead of answering or even humoring my question, he pushed it open and bade me to follow him. What I saw in front of me was some kind of laboratory, but it too seemed to be a mixture of the old and the new. In a distant corner I saw medieval experimenting tables, stacks of minerals, mud, and clay covered them. In front stood shrouded figures, forming them into approximations of the human body. In another I saw lumps of raw flesh sewn together into abominable forms, twisted beings resembling neither man nor animal, things comprising nothing but arms or bodies, snake-like and slithering, abominable beings created with a singular purpose in mind. At first I thought they were nothing but models, but then I saw them twitch and steer, showing they were alive. My eyes, however, focused on the most modern part of this mad place, something akin to a genetic laboratory. It comprised modern equipment, test tubes, tanks, and vats in which things were growing. Things close to human form, embryos, I realized. What is this place? What's happening here? Have you ever read Thomas Brown? His Regalio Medica? What does it matter if I... What about Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust? Thank Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I just stared at the figure that had once been my grandfather, still not understanding what these books, these names, had to do with the madness that I was witnessing here. Have you ever heard the word homunculus? I opened my mouth, but instead of answering, I watched the twisted work that continued all around us, watched as bodies were formed from clay and mud, as lumps of flesh were being stacked on top of one another, and once more I stared at the human-shaped things growing in the vats and tanks. No, it can't be. That makes no sense. Something like this. I stammered, overwhelmed by the revelation that just hit me. As I explained before, he created servants. Beings not entirely human, approximations, fakes, homunculi, if you will. But in time the process was being improved, perfected even, and what was once crude amalgamations of flesh eventually became... But why are you showing me all this? Why'd you give me this godforsaken place? I screamed those words at him. Screamed them as loud as I could to drown out the ghastly thought that had slowly clawed its way into my mind and begun festering there. As if to answer, his hand fell on my shoulder, and for a moment he gave me a caressing squeeze. It was all that was necessary to answer my question, to confirm the terrible truth about our lineage. We were created for a single purpose, Daniel. No! How could any of this? How could... I grew up at Dustwall Manor. You told me about my mother. What happened to her? And you were created in this very room, Daniel. Just like I was before you and all those others you see here. Let me ask you, doesn't this place feel familiar? Haven't you seen it before? It's because of the dreams. I saw it in my dreams. They haunted me for weeks, for months, so... What exactly are dreams, Daniel? He cut in. Aren't they nothing but our brains sorting through our memories, interpreting them? Didn't you feel the familiarity of this place the moment you stepped inside? It... I couldn't go on. He was right. The familiarity I'd felt from those dreams, it was because I'd felt like I was retracing my very own steps. But then, why send me to London? Why urge me on the way you did? Why did you tell me never to return to Dustwall Manor? A sigh of the deepest regret sounded from my grandfather's ancient throat before he spoke again. Because I cared for you. I didn't want you to return, didn't want you to become a part of all this. I wanted you to be free, to get away, but what? I failed you. You're here now. But I guess it was always meant to happen this way. All I tried, all I did, it was all predestined. Predestined in this very room before you. Before I was even formed, your life, just like mine, and that of any other member of the Whitmore family, was lined out long before... No, that's not true. Sure, you took care of me. Sure, you chose that boarding school for me. But after that, I decided things on my own. My field of study, my... And why did you choose those specific fields? Why history? Why contemporary politics? Why'd you decide to bother trying to understand the workings of the modern world? What are you... Once more, I couldn't go on. I began to think, to really think. Hadn't all of it happened because of my upbringing, because of my obsession with all the stories I'd heard about my family? Hadn't it been my wish to understand how my family came to be and thus been driven to also make sense of the world? And yet, why exactly? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I'd been pushed, goaded in this direction by an invisible power, and if it had been whispered to me by something else, and all I'd ever done had been chosen for me. But then, why? Why'd I even be allowed to go out into the world? Why bother with this entire goddamn charade? If this is our work, if this is what we're destined to do, why allow anyone to travel, to explore, and the world is ever changing, Daniel. It's always turning. And there's always new knowledge to be added to our vast archives. Whenever we succeed and we're able to create a perfect specimen, those creatures become the members of the Whitmore family and are sent out into the world to gather the knowledge we need before they eventually return to join the rest of us on our eternal mission. Eternal mission. Suddenly I remembered who I was even talking to. My grandfather. How is he even alive? How are you even here, Grandpa? I mean, those letters, the death certificate, how could you possibly? I didn't die, Daniel. It was merely the end of my tutelage and my role as your guardian. None of us will ever truly die. The hell do you even mean? What the hell does any of this mean? I got a hold of him in my frustration and my confusion. I began to shake him, and suddenly the shroud covering his face was thrown aside. The face I saw was one that shouldn't be alive. It was nothing but taut skin stretched over brittle bone. Where his eyes should have been, eyes that were once of piercing blue, were now only two deep, gorging holes. His nose was nothing but a twisted mess of darkened cartilage. What remained of his lips were curled back, revealing part of the jaw and a few lonely, blackened teeth. I screamed and reeled back in terror, and my grandfather, with a trembling hand, comprising nothing but bone, quickly covered his features again, as if to hide his wretched appearance from not only me, but the rest of the world as well. That's our lineage, Daniel. Our curse, he finally whispered in a quivering voice. We're made to serve, and serve we shall for all eternity. We've gotten better at creating these bodies, but they will still age, still break, and yet... But how can you even... How's that... There are ways, Daniel. Knowledge. And in time, we learned many things, and so will you. For a moment, I was baffled by his last words. But then I knew what they meant. Understood why I'd been led here. Terror washed over me, and my entire body began trembling. Oh, God. I was meant to become one of those things, those shrouded figures. I was meant to be enslaved down here for all eternity, just like they were, meant to join this ghastly work and to bring back this awe-inspiring, magnificent, terrible entity. And just like my grandfather and all those countless others, I'd turn into a rotten corpse. Another broken thing cursed to serve forever. In a panic, I dashed past the shriveled corpse that had once been my grandfather and dashed away. He didn't reach out for me, he didn't come after me, and only his words followed me. How futile it is, was all he said. But those words were filled with such endless misery, sadness, and pain. They made me stumble as if struck. As I ran, I pushed myself through the mass of shrouded figures, pushed them aside and into one another, revealing what lay below their heavy shrouds. Many of them were feeble as Grandpa, comprising nothing but skin and bone, nothing but walking corpses. Others were twisted heaps of flesh that made me reel back in disgust, amalgamations just like those I'd seen being created in that laboratory. Some were even stranger, however. Nothing but clay and stone. Golems, I realized. I even saw mixtures of organic and inorganic constructs of living tissue and various minerals. There were even some my hands passed right through. Found nothing to hold on to, gaseous entities comprising nothing but glowing orbs, as if only their souls remained. Yet still bound, still conscripted. It was the horror of existence in all its magnificent glory, driven to its sheer impossible limits. And then beyond. I eventually reached the stairs and continued my dash upward. On and on I went. When my legs failed, I continued to crawl, clawing at the stairs ahead of me. Further and further I dragged myself, pulling myself onward over moist, moss-covered steps, before after what felt like an eternity, I escaped from the staircase. I expected someone or something to come after me, to drag me back down, but I was, strangely, left to my own devices. Upon my return to my quarters, I set out to end it all, to burn it all to the ground. Dustwall Manor, the legacy of what I'd thought to be the Whitmore family line, and to close off that abominable staircase and what lay beyond forever. And yet, I couldn't do it. Countless times I lit the match, countless times I held the blazing embers in my hand, but did nothing. The few times I managed to set fire to a tapestry or a tome in my grandfather's library, I doused them as quickly as they were born. Something's reaching out to me. Into my mind. Telling me, compelling me, commanding me to stop all this nonsensical struggle and to follow my birthright. I told myself I wouldn't. I screamed at myself I'd run and I'd flee from Dustwall Manor, but whenever I tried, I found myself lost in the labyrinth, in the mess of hallways. Every day, every night, every single minute, it becomes harder to resist the voice that tells me to return, to serve, to become part of its eternal mission. I know I can't last. I won't last. That's why I left. Why I wasn't bothered upon my return from that terrible place. All I can do is share these mad, incoherent ramblings, this warning that most will discard as the words of a madman. I don't know what this thing is. I don't know how or when, but I know one day the terrible entity that was once known as Sir Isaac Whitmore will return. And when it does, all will be lost. It looked like an old steel bulkhead. The kind you would find in the interior of an old military vessel, with those large wheels that you have to turn to open the door. Over 10,000 meters of depth and 15,200 psi is what our equipment measured. To find anything man-made at that depth was inconceivable. I couldn't believe it. It was on the side of an especially steep drop. The rectangle of steel, while difficult to spot, didn't exactly appear natural. It stood out to me, despite the total lack of visibility. I immediately turned to my partner. It's crazy how the darkness fucks with your brain if you stare into it long enough, I said. The submersible was a research submarine, designed for a 2-man crew, but there was barely enough space for one. Stanley was the man next to me. He was my co-pilot and research assistant. I know what you're talking about, said Stanley with a smile. That rock looks like a cabin door. It's got the wheel and everything. It's exactly what I'm talking about. I leaned in to take a closer look. Look how smooth it is, too. It seemed we both knew that we had to take a closer look. I slowed the descent of the ship and intensified the headlights. There, in the middle of a steep, jagged cliff over 10,000 meters below the ocean surface, was a door. It was impossible to mistake it for a rock formation. It had perfectly cut edges, rounded, smoothed out, completely symmetrical. It had the wheel in the center, too, which coincided with no rock that I'd ever seen. Without a doubt, it was a door. A steel bulkhead. How in the world? I said. Shipwreck? Here? Can't be in such a perfect condition. I was whispering. We continued our slow descent until the bulkhead was directly in front of us. I halted the submarine with the beams pointing directly at the door. I took some pictures and sent them up along with some data, I told Stanley. I heard Stanley clicking at the machinery. I stood still, staring into the monitor in front of me. The submarine was very small. It didn't have a window to the outside. Our exterior was displayed on a small screen. I leaned in to get a closer look. My eyes widened. Wait, Stanley, I said. Stanley faced me. Bottom right. Look. Stanley turned his head and looked into the monitor. There, engraved on the surface of the door, near the bottom right, was a very short collection of images. I was amazed that we'd missed them before, but as I intensified the headlights again, there could be no doubt that they were there. One of them caught my attention. It was one in the middle, the third drawing. Very minimalistic, very small, but it was the outline of a skull, a human skull. Looked more like a caricature. Forehead was a little too round, the chin was slightly too short. It looked like a human skull drawn from memory, at least similar to one. But the other ones, the other 5 pictures, were even more unsettling. The first one, though a little wide, looked like some prehistoric skeleton or a representation of a fossil. From there, the drawings were nearly incomprehensible. One was a long, angular skull that coincided with no animal I'd ever seen. Another looked like the depiction of a bug, maybe a wasp or a mantis, only bony and cadaverous. The one thing the images had in common was that, in some way, they all looked like skulls. What the fuck? Stanley whispered. Take the pictures. I was staring into the monitor. I watched Stanley take a new snapshot, then turned to his computer. He began typing and transferring data from the submersible. All right, sending, he said. What do you think they are? And I was hypnotized. I couldn't stop looking at the door and creatures engraved onto it. Probably a warning, like signs representing a hazard, I said. The middle one looks like a human skull. Whatever was in there, it didn't take a genius to understand that we weren't supposed to go inside. The lock on the outside, the depictions, the depth itself told us everything. Alex, I heard Stanley say, and I snapped out of my trance. It only makes sense to open it. I snapped my head to the side. Are you insane? It absolutely does not. I raised my voice slightly. Stan stood still, looked confused. I didn't think I would need to explain myself, and I sighed. It's a steel bulkhead, 10,000 meters below the ocean surface, with a half dozen depictions of animal-like skeletons, of which all but one are familiar. Sealed from the outside. You want to open it? No. Maybe we should get the green light first. I guess. I already asked the crew, he said. Yeah. Well, the crew is going to take my side, I promise you, I said, and Stanley shrugged. Probably nuclear waste or something like that. And it's definitely not meant to be opened. Stanley looked back at me. Doors to nuclear waste don't have doorknobs, Stanley said. They're sealed airtight, welded shut, bared with concrete. He had a point. But before I could say anything in response, a message arrived. Proceed. We stared in confusion. They're telling us to open the door, Stanley said. No, they're telling us to proceed with our original mission. Isn't that obvious? I responded. The response was extremely odd. We typically have received detailed instructions, or at least a very well-structured professional response. Alex moved the submarine forward. I need to get close enough to use the mechanical arms, he said. I was shocked. You're telling me that a group of highly trained, intelligent research scientists just gave us the go-ahead to open a watertight door with 15,000 psi of pressure? The message says proceed. That's the literal definition of a go-ahead. Send another one. Tell them to be clear this time, I told him. I wasn't even sure why I was entertaining the idea. I heard him typing, and I watched him closely this time. Sure enough, he asked the crew to elaborate and sent the message. We waited in silence for a few moments. We'd been delayed enough already. I couldn't wait to leave the door behind. And just then, the message arrived. Open the door. My eyes went wide. Something about the message made my blood freeze. It was unlike any message we'd received. Told you, Alex. Now move the submarine forward. Stanley was impatient. Something's wrong. They wouldn't have sent Alex! Stanley screamed. The extremely small cabin made the sound seem louder than it should have been. He caught me off guard. Stanley, I can't do that. You have to understand how unprofessional such a response is. The team would not have sent that. Well, they just did. Are you refusing orders? This isn't a military vessel, Stanley. I'm still the captain of this vessel, I said. Stanley didn't seem happy. He was anxious somehow, and he furrowed his brow in a mixture of anger and confusion. Alex, if you don't move the sub forward, I will. I was shocked. Stanley, listen to me. Alex, if you don't move the submersible forward, I will. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist and squeezed. We have to go ahead, Alex. Move the sub. I'd never seen him like this. Stanley was a large man, and his strength was far above mine, but he'd always been the kindest, most lighthearted person on the team. What are you doing? Let go of me! Suddenly, he lunged forward and tried to stand. The space was too small for him to stand, and his back hit the ceiling of the cabin. His hand was still around my wrist, and his free hand was moving for the control panel. I twisted my body and managed to get out from under him. I pushed him away while having my back to the wall. It worked with great effort. He fell back in his seat. Move the ship forward, he screamed, spit flying from his lips as he did. Stanley, calm down. He seemed to be in a frenzy. His chest rose and fell rapidly, and he gripped his chair so hard that his fingernails dug into the cushions. Stan, what's the matter with you? I grabbed my wrist with my other hand, massaging the area. He'd scratched the skin on my wrist, and gripped so tight the flesh was turning red. Stanley started, taking deep breaths between pauses. I know that we have to get closer, or I can't use the mechanical arms to open the door. But why do you want to open the door? I said in disbelief. He made a nasty expression, as if I'd said something unreasonable. He took a sharp breath through his teeth. Alex, for the last time, if you don't move the submersible forward, I will, he said. I saw him grip the armrest of his chair even harder. Stanley, it would be illogical to open... He pushed himself off his chair and slammed into me. I was pushed back and my head slammed against the wall behind me. I grabbed the back of my head in pain. By the time I recovered from the impact, I saw Stanley on the control panel. The submarine was moving forward. I leaned forward, but Stanley was still leaning into my chair, and his knee was pushing me down. I tried to push him away, but the space was so small that his back was against the ceiling, and there was no space to push him towards. I decided to grab his hands instead and pull them away from the controls. I pulled at his hand and managed to shift it away from the lever. The rapid motion made the submarine jolt forward, and the sub crashed against the cliffside. We were thrown forward violently, and Stanley's body smashed into the main monitor. He turned around at me, and his face was entirely red. The look on his face was savage. He was breathing through his teeth, and his eyes were nothing but pupils. He jumped towards me, slamming into me and scratching me with his nails. I brought my knee up and smashed it against his ribcage. He screamed, but he continued grabbing at my throat, clawing with his nails, and then his right hand was able to close around my neck, and he squeezed with all the strength that he had. I couldn't comprehend what was happening, but I wasn't going to try to talk my way out of it anymore. Stanley was my friend, but this couldn't have been the same man as before. I hit him as hard as I could with my knee, but his grip didn't loosen. Though he screamed in fury, I tried again and again, all of my hits landing perfectly, but he wouldn't let go. The pressure inside of my head increased. It felt as if every vein in my head was about to explode. I hit him again, and I was sure that I had felt his rib crack. Still, he only screamed and tightened his grip. My vision was fading. I had to think of something. I saw the monitor. The one displaying the exterior. Stanley had smashed into it, and the support had been destroyed, but it was still connected to its cable. I reached out and grabbed it, pulled at it until the cable snapped, and the heavy monitor came loose, brought it up and slammed down, connecting with the back of his neck. Stanley went limp, falling on my chest. I gasped frantically, holding my throat. I write this now, sitting in silence, trying to process what's just happened. The monitor's gone, the submarine sight is gone. Stanley's body's limp against me as I've been unable to push him away in the cramped space. It's now claustrophobic. The only camera left is the one that's connected to the claw of a mechanical arm outside. I'm writing this on Stanley's computer. As I do, I keep receiving the same exact message. Turn the wheel. The apparatus that controls the mechanical arm outside is still intact. I know that if I simply reach over and use the small camera to find the wheel, I can open the door. I want to move the submersible away to start my ascent to the surface. Trust me, I do, but I can't. The ballast systems, no matter what I do, they won't respond. I'm stuck here. I've asked for help, but I only received the same message. Turn the wheel. I'm sorry. I say that because after all of this, after what happened to Stanley, and without knowing why, I really want to listen. I really want to turn the wheel. And worst of all, I don't even know why. Every message, every signal, and every attempt to communicate with the surface was met with the same response. Turn the wheel. I couldn't take it anymore. My co-pilot's body was slumped against me, blood trickling down from the back of his head and tapping against my suit. This space made it difficult to push him away, but I didn't try anyway. I could only focus on one thing. The door. My mind was practically screaming at me. It was a real painful sensation that made me grasp my head with my hands. I knew that if I only took hold of the control panel, I could turn the wheel with the mechanical arms and end the horrible feeling. If I opened the door, it would all go away. I felt angry, irrationally anxious. It was horrible. I screamed and smashed the computer against the cabin wall. I watched the screen glitch and turn off entirely. I huffed for a few moments before I realized what I'd done. I recovered the computer and tried to turn it on. I failed the first time, but on the second, the screen lit up, though there was a large line running through it. As I reconnected it to the submarine system, something appeared in the corner of the screen. It was a message. I knew what it would read, but I clicked it anyway. As soon as I did, my eyes went wide. It wasn't the typical message. For a second, the need to open the door was gone. Stanley Wilson, report. This is a request for your immediate return to base. Activate your radio communication system. It's brief, shorter than most, but it was a real message. I was overjoyed. I opened the message and activated the microphone. This is Alexander Morgan, Captain. Wilson is unable to respond and in critical condition. Ballast systems are offline, likely destroyed. Please advise, I said. I waited for a few moments. Then the device came to life. Captain Morgan, scans suggest that your vessel is near a rock formation, correct? The voice said. Correct, I answered immediately. I couldn't have been more excited to hear the voice of a member of my team. There's a way to temporarily enable the ballast system and allow the vessel to begin ascending. Captain Morgan, take command of the mechanical arms. The one thing I'd been avoiding all this time, for what felt like hours, was to use the mechanical arms. The need to open the door had lessened, but I was still reluctant. I leaned forward and activated the arms. I wasn't going to let an opportunity pass. Now, your goal is to push away from the rock formation using the mechanical arms. This will change the pressure within the ballast system and allow them to function. Use the arms to hold a nearby rock. I extended both arms slowly. As I did, the camera lit up. The first thing I saw was the steel bulkhead. I could still see the images engraved on the bottom. It made my blood freeze. This monitor was smaller, but the image was perfectly clear. I held the surface of the cliff with the arms, but I was unable to find a steady spot. Captain Morgan, find a protruding portion of the cliffside. The only part of the wall that extended out and that could be held was the wheel. Negative, there's no protruding portions, I said. I felt like a coward, but after all that happened, I wanted nothing to do with the door. Captain Morgan, listen to me. There's no other way. I sighed. It was an anxious, nervous sigh. I wanted the nightmare to end, and the only thing I wanted to avoid above all else was the door. Reluctantly, I held the wheel with the mechanical arms. Both claws seemed to wrap around the edges perfectly. Now, Captain Morgan. The voice had changed. It was slow, monotonous. Turn the wheel. My face went pale. Captain Morgan, turning the wheel will allow the vessel to ascend. I shut the computer violently, pushing it away. I put my head in my hands and covered my ears. The feeling, the need to open the door, it was back. It made me furious. Alex, a voice came from the closed computer. I recognized the voice. The voice was distorted and it glitched at intervals, but it was unmistakable. It only makes sense to open it. It was Stanley. That couldn't be possible. Stanley's lifeless. or at least unconscious body was still on top of me, dripping blood on my chest, yet the voice from the computer sounded exactly like it. Alex, if you don't turn the wheel, I will, the voice said. It sent shivers down my spine. This is what you wanted, isn't it? Stanley's voice was perfectly calm. I tried to stop you, and you won. And now you changed your mind. My fingers were deep within my ears, trying to block out the sound. They were piercing as far as they could go. Still I could hear the voice as if my hearing was perfect. Why did you kill me, Alex? I wanted to help. To stop you. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't even know what the voice was talking about. I just wanted the horrible pain to go away. You killed me over this. The voice seemed melancholy but distant. So now, if you don't open the door I died over, I will. The pain in my head increased to unbearable levels. I screamed. It felt like I was being tortured. All I had to do was hit the button and the pain would stop. I knew that it would. It was the only way. Without thinking, I hit the button on the control panel. I heard the machinery whir and the wheel rotated with a jolt to the side. The wheel stayed in its position for a few seconds. And then the view exploded in front of me. The door imploded inward so fast that disappeared would have been a better word. The submersible exploded forward under the unfathomable pressure. Over 10,000 meters underwater and over 1,000 times the Earth's atmosphere. The pressure change was immense. Everything must have happened in a millisecond. For the instant, the door had vanished. My vision went black. I can't explain how it's possible I survived. Or how it's true that the submersible didn't implode. But I awoke feeling as if I had slept for no more than a few seconds. My hands were still on the button and everything in the cabin was in the same position as before. I couldn't understand how the vessel had stayed intact. It almost felt like the cut of a movie scene. One moment the submarine was about to be demolished, the next it had been placed in another location. The question was, where had the submarine been placed? I looked at the small monitor. At first I saw nothing but darkness. I had to move the mechanical arm to reveal the scene. One thing did appear on the monitor. It looked like a large, heavy beam of metal. Must have been twice the width of the submersible, at least 4 times as long. At one point it curved upward. Somehow the submarine's ballast system had come online, and I was not only able to ascend and descend, but move back and forth as well. The submersible was in perfect condition. I followed the metal beam to the point where it curved. I saw that it looped around and that the beam was actually part of a large oval of metal. Connected to this was another oval. It was a chain. I had seen chains used in underwater construction, but this one was colossal. I followed the chain with the submarine, hoping it was attached to a larger structure and that I could follow it and find my way out. I must have followed at least 15 links before the massive chain abruptly stopped. At one point there was only half a link. The metal had been broken in half. The giant link was split. The computer screen lit up suddenly, catching me off guard. Captain Morgan, a voice from the computer. What the hell happened? You went dark and now our scans detect you're 500 meters from your previous location. We've been trying to reach you for hours. I recovered my breath. This is Alex, can you hear me? A brief silence. Captain, get up here now. People are acting like lunatics. The crew's lost their minds. I was frozen. I couldn't believe it. The nightmare wasn't over. Scans are going wild. What's happening down there? I was unable to process what I was hearing through the device. At that moment, something broke the silence of the water around me. It was a deep, echoing bellow. It sounded more like an earthquake shaking the water or a distant roar of thunder. It's practically no sound, just an intense, distant rumble. The submarine literally trembled. I heard the metal rattle around me. I needed to know what was in the void, and my headlights were obviously not going to help. At this depth, the water was incredibly heavy. It almost felt thick, and it was so dark that there was no way I would be able to see my surroundings. I needed another way to see where I was. I set the submarine to remain still and shut off any unnecessary systems. I turned the sonar display. The returns showed a faint signal, very distant. It got stronger and weaker. Something was shifting in the water far away. The void around me shook again. For it to move as fast as the returns showed, it seemed slow and sluggish. Its size must have been unfathomable. Captain, what are you doing? You are clear to ascend. Ascend immediately. Help me. The crew is outside. I don't know how much more the door is going to be able to hold. I couldn't comprehend what I was hearing, but I wasn't going to stay down there any longer. I wanted out. I took control of the submarine and initiated my ascent. Suddenly, the communication device came to life again. I heard glass break and a half scream, and then silence. As I went up more and more, broken chains passed by me, each larger than the last. Some were as big as houses, others larger than airplanes. Captain. The voice was distorted. The great chains are broken. We await his arrival. Goodbye, Captain. Silence. Stanley has died of his injuries. I'm alone on the research ship, but at least I'm on the surface now. The bodies of my surface crew are floating in the water. I don't know why, but they all jumped. The sensors light up with data, and I can do nothing but watch as the numbers rise to impossible levels. I've been writing for some time, but I'll make this portion brief. Unfortunately, I have a deadline. There are at least 4 earthquakes, the smallest of these measuring at a magnitude of 9.5. The waves that these have produced are heading towards the coastal cities of Japan, the Philippines, New Guinea, Taiwan, and Guam. It's as if I'm a spectator to the apocalypse. Screens light up, alarms blare, and I'm forced to stand witness. Worst of all, scans detect seismic activity within the Mariana Trench, in the exact position where my expedition took place. I've seen too much to assume it's an earthquake. Whatever it is also ascending. According to the data, it'll surface in 5 minutes. Its size measures 2,000 meters in length. I won't be alive to witness it. It's predicted to surface near my ship. Whatever those massive chains were meant to hold, they're no longer serving their purpose. I have 2 children, Nathan and Anna. A couple of months ago, I took Anna to a private hospital for a procedure to have 4 of her wisdom teeth extracted. These teeth were well embedded in my daughter's gums, necessitating the use of a general anesthetic. Necessitating, in fact, a visit to an all-hours private clinic. Time was of the essence. Frustratingly, there were unforeseen delays with other surgeries that day, so Anna endured an agonizing wait for what ended up being an extremely late surgery. An extremely involved surgery. The extraction of those impacted molars lasted 2 hours all in all, and was rather anxiety-inducing for me too. Now, anybody who's seen the aftermath of such a procedure, in either reality or the YouTube footage of a sadistic parent, knows that it often involves wonky, witty remarks from the recovering patient. And whilst I didn't have a recording phone at the time, I will admit that I was hoping for some bizarre wordplay. But my daughter, instead, she uttered something vile. Before I repeat her confession, here's some context. My husband, Ed, used to go whitewater rafting with our 2 children and his brother, Darren. Some years ago, I'd go with them, but work commitments often clashed. Well, anyway, Ed wasn't a particularly strong swimmer, so I always felt a little uneasy about the idea of him out on such a unforgiving water without me. In late 2022, my worst fear came true. A strong current pulled my husband under, and by the time Darren had recovered his brother's body, Ed had drowned. The following months were unspeakably awful for the entire family, but Anna was affected the most severely. To get even a handful of words out of her became an impossible feat, but that didn't stop Uncle Darren from trying. From helping the family in Ed's absence to survive mentally and physically, it was no surprise to me when Darren offered to accompany us to the hospital for Anna's surgery, and offered to keep Nathan company whilst my daughter underwent the procedure. And around 11 in the evening, when my daughter woke from the anesthesia, all those factors were filling my mind. "Hello, darling," I said softly, using a pinky to hoist Annie's sweaty bangs out of her listless rolling eyes. "How are you feeling?" My daughter's doped-up face observed me absently, but within the teary pools of her wandering eyes, there swam thoughts. Loose, spiraling thoughts of a mind disarrayed, but not disillusioned, and certainly not duplicitous. I trusted the words which would eventually spill from her puffy cheeks. First, of course, came confusion. "The house looks empty," Anna said in a half-muffle, wafting both her hands at the right side of the hospital room, an unlit space lined with empty beds. "We're not at our house, sweet pea. We're in the recovery room," I explained. "This is the hospital, remember? But you do have that massive space all to yourself, so I suppose it must seem quite empty." Anna responded incoherently. "Everything's fine. It was a straightforward procedure," I continued. "But you're gonna feel a little out of it once the drugs wear off, honey." "Where's the man?" she added in a low, disoriented moan. I smiled. "Dr. Addis. He's doing the rounds, but Joyce is here. Remember her from earlier?" The young nurse, fiddling with various instruments on a trolley, looked up and beamed. "Hello, Anna. You are being really brave. I'm going to run a few tests now, and I want you to let me know if you feel any pain or sickness, okay? No," Anna interrupted. "The man." "She must miss Dr. Addis," Joyce teased. I looked at the nurse apologetically. "Sorry." The woman grinned widely and shook her head. "Don't be silly, Mrs. Carey. Anna, I'm sure Dr. Addis will be back soon, but The man!" Anna loudly said again. "Nathan didn't see." "Sweetie," I began. Then my daughter's wide eyes shot to me, and she slurred a wretched confession. "Dad didn't fall into the water. He was pushed. Don't tell Mom. He says he'll kill us if I tell Mom." There followed a silence. Silence which pressed heavily against the skin, weighing both Joyce and me to the floor. The nurse clearly felt something in Anna's words, too, something more than the drug-induced nonsense with which she must have been accustomed. "Where's the man?" my daughter whispered. And I finally understood that she was not talking about Dr. Addis. Uncle Darren and Nathan were sitting in the waiting room. That horrifying thought circled my mind as I processed Anna's claim, a supposedly nonsensical claim. That was what any rational person would believe, or at the very least, want to believe. However, a memory came to the forefront of my mind. Last year, on Christmas Day, Darren made a pass at me. "Gin and hormones, Cynthia," my brother-in-law sheepishly promised after I spurned him. That was all. I chose to accept the explanation, given that our entire family had already been through so much, but my gut never fully settled. Even before my husband's death, something about his brother didn't sit well with me. And my doubt only deepened when Uncle Darren, following Ed's death, forcibly muscled his way into my immediate family and injected himself into the main artery of our lives. Obviously, relatives should be there for a grieving family, but Darren tried time and time again to go above the call of duty. He'd turn up at our home uninvited, unannounced, to take us out for luxurious meals, would incessantly coax the children to letting him sleep over on weekends. Primarily, he achieved this by manipulating Nathan into thinking that it would be cruel for the children's dear uncle to drive home at a late hour. Worst of all, during those untoward sleepovers, I would occasionally hear footsteps echo from the upstairs landing. Would occasionally see a shadow painting the crack between my bedroom door. And from time to time, I would wake in a sweat to find my bedroom door ajar. Once I opened half-sleeping eyes to see a figure sitting on my chair in the corner of the room. I told myself it had simply been a dream. One fever dream of many. But I now know better. "Anna?" I feebly whimpered. "Do you understand what you just told me? Was it true?" My daughter loudly shushed me and tried to lift a finger to her lips, but her dozy limb only half cooperated. "We don't speak about it. He says he'll hear if we speak about it. He's always listening." "Mrs. Carey," the nurse croaked, "should I proceed?" I shook my head, absently boring into Anna's pillow. I don't know what we should do right now. Anna, was this a dream that you had? Please tell me that you had... "This!" my daughter interrupted, showing a scar on her forearm. "This wasn't from the ore, it was from him!" My face turned pale as I eyed the faded scar on my daughter's arm. A scar that Darren claimed Anna had acquired from her raft's paddle after it hit a rock, causing a large, jagged splinter of wood to cut into her flesh. I didn't want to imagine what Darren had actually done to my daughter. Things were adding up. As much as I wanted to dismiss Anna's drug-induced story, it made sense. You see, once upon a time my daughter talked and talked and talked, but she hadn't been that way since her father died. Grief had been the obvious explanation, but that never quite felt right to me. Anna's story told from the hospital bed was the truth. I knew that from the moment she spoke. I saw it in her tearful eyes. She wasn't aware of herself. Wasn't aware that she'd just confessed a dark secret to her own mother. "Mrs. Carey," the nurse continued, still seeming uncertain as to what she should say or do. "I'm going to find my son," I said calmly, standing from the bedside chair. "Please watch Anna." My daughter's eyes grew as she finally seemed to identify my face. "Mom?" I seized her hand and squeezed. "Everything's okay, sweetie. Just let Joyce look after you, okay?" "Right, everything's okay," the nurse agreed weakly, as if I said the words for her benefit. I'll do those tests now." I rushed into the corridor and barreled forwards, followed many winding hallways, deserted at that late hour, to find my way back to the waiting area, But I was so lost in thoughts, so lost in the laces of my Converse, that I didn't lift my head until I'd almost stumbled into the new row of blue plastic chairs at the end of the hallway. "Mom?" Nathan asked, swiveling in his seat to look at me. "You all right? You look weird." I'd been too frightened to look ahead. I would have had to plaster a false smile on my face so as to not arouse suspicion from Darren, but there was something far more frightening about seeing my son sitting alone. It was, of course, a blessing to know that I could snatch Nathan's hand and scoot him away without battling a questioning uncle, but it also terrified me. I mean, after all, Darren had gone somewhere. Back along the corridors, which seemed to stretch farther than before, I was ready to tear my daughter out of her bed regardless of the nurse's advice. "Mom, slow down," Nathan pleaded, attempting to wriggle out of my handhold as we rushed towards Anna's room. "Sorry, Nathan," I panted as I shoved the door open, "but I didn't finish that thought. The recovery room was alarmingly quiet. Anna's segment, semi-partitioned from the rest of the space by a thick curtain of green fabric, was the only lit section of the large area. Above her bed, a solitary fluorescent light hummed loudly, the only sound in the room. I rushed towards my unattended daughter and cried, "Where's Joyce?" Anna looked at me with teary eyes. "She's here." Rather than unpacking that remark, I pulled the duvet off my half-conscious daughter's robed body. "We're going home now, Anna. Come on, Nathan and I will help." My son slipped Anna's limp arm around his neck, and I ran around to the left side of the bed. But before I reached my daughter, I slipped, trainer sole squeaking unbearably on the tiles below. Fortunately, my hand reflectively reached out and gripped onto the green curtain for security. However, I knew I shouldn't look down. And when I did, I wished I hadn't. There, starting to stain the lower half of my white Converse, was a pool of red. A pool spreading from a source on the other side of the partition curtain. This wasn't pulled so far across before, I thought, rubbing the fabric between my unsteady fingers. A thought which only filled my mind because I so desperately wanted a distraction from the horror of wading through that gunky liquid, a tainted river that, no matter how shallow it may have been, seemed to resist my feet as they pulled onwards. "Mom?" Nathan asked as he helped Anna stand on the other side of the bed. "What happened?" I answered not with words, but with heavy breathing, and I lifted my twitching eyes to the curtain. Then breath held. I tore the green fabric backwards, and the blackened side of the room was revealed once more. 5 shadowy beds with unlit light fixtures above. I don't remember whether I screamed, as something in my soul disconnected when I saw what lay on Anna's neighboring bed. The lifeless body of Nurse Joyce. The woman's face and scrubs were drenched with thick layers of blood. Her mouth hung open in a final cry, and her eyes were gone. Gone not in the sense that they had been clawed to ribbons, but in the sense that they'd been plucked cleanly from their sockets. 2 deep, blood-filled cavities filling her skull, and her body had been gutted. What remained of the blood in her body was gushing onto the floor, adding to the growing puddle. When I turned to face my children, I was thankful that Anna's vacant eyes were staring at the corner of the room. However, Nathan quickly saw Joyce's body, in spite of my efforts to stand in the way. And he began to cry. Began to buckle under the weight of supporting his sister. "Look at me, both of you!" I cried, nearly slipping in the blood puddle a second time as I rounded the edge of the bed. "Please!" Nathan bawled as I tried to sling Anna's right arm over my shoulder, hoping to escort both of my children out of that nightmare, but my daughter shrugged me off. Before I said a word, Anna pointed a shaking finger at the spot she'd been eyeballing. Pointed at something past the darkened beds. She might have tried to say something out of her gauze-filled mouth, jumbled meaningless words. My daughter seemed even less coherent than before, but I trusted her. I followed her jabbed finger, and when I finally eyed the corner of the room, I saw something worse than Joyce's body. There was just enough light to illuminate the recovery area's vague outline. The 6 segregating curtains had been drawn back to the wall, revealing the full stretch of the room, revealing 5 empty beds and 1 bearing the nurse's mutilated corpse. But the light above Anna's bed barely lit a thing. The room was rather illuminated by light pouring through the window on the far wall. A long glass pane which invited a smidge of moonlight. With moderate squinting, I discerned the outline of an armchair in the room's center, the seat partially visible, much like the dark, featureless head rising above its backrest. Somebody was sitting in the darkness, watching us. He wriggled like a codfish as his lungs filled with water. Came Darren's voice from the blackness. Yeah, but I kept one of his ears above the surface, Cynthia. That way, he could hear me explain in great detail all the things I wanted to do to you. Run! I shrieked at my children as the shape lunged forward. There came the crying of my son, the door handle squeaking downwards, and a man's broad shoe soles hurriedly beating against the floor, loudening as Darren, lost in the shadows, charged toward me. There was no horror quite like an unseen thing's approach. Then the man hurled his body, flung it as if it weren't even a part of him into me. No matter how monstrous that ragdoll he was, at the end of the day, still a man, a heavy-set man with a bulging gut and eyes to match. I was caught so rigidly within this animalistic gaze, which saw me only as prey, that I barely noticed the searing pain in my belly. The agony came, of course, once the adrenaline started to wear off. I didn't mean to kill her, the man muttered, his scentless breath stinging my eyes as he hovered an inch away from my face. Not like Ed. This wasn't part of the plan. We have to go, sweetie. We have to go right now. Children or no children, I don't care. There was something horrific about trying and failing to smell the man's breath. Inhuman breath, neither stale nor rosy. That was Darren. Had always been Darren. Why would his breath smell of a thing? He was nothing, an empty vessel. I'd always known that. Somehow I just didn't have the proof until that dreadful day. Once that horrifying thought abated, realization hit, pain hit. I understood as my abdomen started to throb. My brother-in-law had buried sharp steel in my flesh, falling just shy of puncturing my lung. As Darren continued to twist the knife deeper into my gut, causing me to sputter, he lifted his free hand to my hair and brushed it off my ear. A practiced idea of what it means to be human. Something he'd seen me do to Anna, most likely, but didn't understand. That made me feel sicker. It proved that the creature before me was no person. But that awful concept also motivated me to plunge my quaking fingers into the back pocket of my jeans. Don't worry about this, Darren whispered, motioning at the blade in my belly. Take you back to the van quietly. We'll lie low. I'll get you fixed up. I'll tend to you, care for you, just as I have for the past 2 years. I'll be better than my weak, pathetic excuse for... Halfway through the man's monologue, I did something which I expected to be the end of me. Powered by the last dregs of adrenaline and blood in my fading body, I swung my makeshift weapon. A set of keys wielded between my 2 middle fingers, and I didn't choose a non-fatal mark. I intended to put the monster down. When the keys met Darren's jugular, his flapping lips froze mid-sentence. And then my husband's killer released the fingers gripping the knife, which stayed firmly in my gut. And he moved that hand towards his bleeding neck. tried to cover the wound as he stumbled backwards and spat droplets of blood in lieu of words. I moved with his body as he pulled away, fearing what would happen if I were to lose that opportunity. I repeatedly thrust those brass blades into his throat, intending to inflict as much damage as possible, intending to stop Darren from ever hurting my family again. I didn't want him to rot in prison, as I knew I would forever live in terror of him escaping, finding us. The next time, he wouldn't have kept me alive as some plaything. He would have sought revenge. He would have ended me, and I know that. Moreover, I wanted Darren to drown, as my dear Ed had drowned. And my brother-in-law suffered a worse fate, in fact, as he drowned in his own blood. That's how they explained it to me. They say his airways filled with it. Hardly surprising, given that I stabbed the man 46 times. That his neck, a mangled, mushy mound of skin and blood. Darren was pronounced dead by emergency responders. Dr. Addis had dialed 911 when my children found him in a nearby corridor and explained the situation. Addis did, of course, immediately rush to Darren's aid. Such was his oath. That was why I ensured that there would be no salvaging my brother-in-law. To let him live would have been a nightmare. Even dead, the man haunts me. And I'll always hear as I lie in my room at night Darren's unholy confession of what he did to the love of my life. I'll always hear an unspoken confession of what he was going to do to me. I'll always see him sitting in that chair in the corner of my room. I have to admit, I fell in love with Shitlick the moment I first laid eyes on him. The little guy had just stepped out of his wheel, where he had been burning off that good old hamster energy. He was sitting in the middle of his sawdust-covered cage, one hairy little leg stretched out, cute little toes splayed, vigorously licking his own ass. Henceforth, the name. Of course, my wife hated the name, just like she hated the little guy the minute I brought him in. She wouldn't even hold his cage on her lap. Told me to put the rat on the back seat. Emma and I had only been married a year, and I already knew that I had made a massive mistake. To be honest, I think the bald colonel downstairs had been running the show for some time when it came to Emma. But not that I could blame him. Emma was a money-grabbing narcissistic, wrapped in the package of a blonde goddess. Only after we'd been married a few months had the Mushroom Master let all the blood rush back into my brain. I myself had never been too much to look at. I wasn't overly tall or particularly well built, and at 35, my hair had already begun to thin. I guess my only redeeming qualities were my work ethic and my love of animals. That particular ethic had served me well. I was an upcoming lawyer in a prestigious firm. Emma had been a clerk at my firm, and we had met at the Christmas party. Soon after, we had been married, and she had quit her job, deciding to stay home with her new best friend, my credit card. Not 2 months after she'd moved in, the complaints about my animals had started. She had hated my 2 Labradors, Nick and Knack, but it was my cat, Mr. Fluffers, she hated the most. She constantly complained about the old guy's litter tray, and God forbid he should jump into her lap, looking for any kind of affection. Then came the day I arrived from work to find that Mr. Fluffers had run away. Well, according to Emma. But the poor old guy had been getting on in years and didn't even want to leave the house anymore, not even to chase the nut-crazed squirrels across the street. 2 days later, I found Mr. Fluffer's collar hidden under the kitchen sink. Stuffed way back with all the useless crap everyone buys but never seems to use. It was at this point I knew I couldn't live with Emma anymore. She was cruel, lazy, and her demands for more money would soon see us both on the street. Not long after, I filed for divorce. Of course, Emma only grinned at me and told me that she looked forward to taking half of my shit. As she said this, her eyes fell on Nick and Knack, and her smile widened, revealing the perfectly capped teeth that I was still paying for. That's when I knew I had to get away. Without a moment's hesitation, I packed my clothes and grabbed Shitlick and my two good boys, their doggy tails wagging with excitement, as I loaded them into the car and headed up into the foothills of the Appalachians. My father had built a cabin up there, and I spent most summers in my youth fishing and hunting in that place deep in the woods. Over the years, I had turned it into more of a second home, or a summer place. The cabin had all the modern conveniences, and would tide me over nicely while I took a sabbatical from work till this damn divorce was over. I'd probably walk away a darn sight poorer, but at least my animals would be safe from Emma's wrath up here in the mountains with me. As I stood in the dirt driveway at the cabin, soaking up the red hues of another sunset, I found myself feeling some kind of peace at last. Walking back inside, I closed the door behind me, slamming the bolt in place, before heading into the kitchen. Nick and Knack followed close behind me, their tails wagging with excitement. Reaching up, I grabbed the dry food and then looked at them questioningly. Both looked back at me as if to say, "Really? That crap again?" Sighing, knowing they had used some kind of doggy Jedi mind trick on me, I cracked open the stinky gravy chunks they love so much. This caused a flurry of excitement, and I laughed as they jumped around. Knack even began to chase his own tail. Even Shitlick stopped his manic exercise routine on his squeaking wheel to enjoy the particular show. Okay, I said, chuckling. It's coming. That said, I slopped the foul-smelling shit into their bowls before opening up a nearby window. It was early summer, and unfortunately I hadn't gotten around to installing air conditioning in the cabin, so we grabbed what little breeze we could. I slumped down in my comfortable lounger, just about to flick on the TV, when my phone began to buzz angrily in my pocket. With a sigh, I scooped it out. The number was from the house phone. I couldn't help but grin, knowing what this particular call would be about. "Hello?" I said smugly into the phone. "You son of a bitch," she hissed back at me. "You canceled my credit card, didn't you?" "Well, actually, it was my credit card," I replied. "I killed your fucking cat," she suddenly screamed down the phone, as I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I had always suspected foul play, but it was so blatantly admitted, it stalled my brain for a moment. I was about to reply, perhaps to call her a murdering, feline-killing bitch, but the phone was already dead in my hands, and just like that, I burst into tears. Maybe it was for poor Mr. Fluffers, or maybe for myself, but I was soon confronted as a wet nose brushed against my hand. Seeing my distress, Nick and Knack had come to my side, and were both whining softly. "It's okay, boys," I said, stroking their silky fur. "Everything will be just fine." Shitlick, who had bigger fish to fry than one bawling human, was now drinking from his water bottle, his brown fur rippling from a faint summer breeze at his place by the window. "Son of a bitch," I grinned at him as he picked up a sunflower seed in his little paw and began to chow down. "Go get him, Shitlick." Of course he didn't reply, but just began to burrow under a straw, ready for bed as the sky grew darker outside. The shadows from the surrounding trees growing longer. "Yeah, great idea," I sighed, suddenly feeling tired and worn out. Later that night, I was awakened by the whining of Nick and Knack. "Give me a break, guys," I muttered, reaching for my phone, still half asleep. It was 2:15 in the morning. Still, the dogs continued their whining, and I sat up a little straighter. The room was flooded with pale moonlight. Strange shadows seemed to crawl across my bed, and I looked at the two dogs, their hackles raised, teeth bared, as I followed their gaze. "Fuck!" I yelled, pushing myself further into the headboard. There was a deer shadow outside my window, but it was standing on its hind legs. Its cloven hooves pressed against the window, its head cocked at a curious angle, but I swear its eyes burned yellow with a frightening intelligence. Its ragged breath steamed up the window as I watched on in horror. Its long tongue lolled from its mouth, it licked the cold glass in one long, hideous stroke, its eyes never leaving my face. Just then, Nick launched himself at the glass, and in the blink of an eye, the creature was gone. "Nick!" I called after him. "Come here, boy!" For a moment, he did nothing but snarl and whine. Eventually, he came to me, bounding up onto the bed. Knack did the same. Usually, I wouldn't allow for this. They had their own large, comfortable doggy bed on the floor of the room, but after seeing that dreadful apparition, I needed some comfort. "It's rabies," I muttered. "Damn thing must have some kind of rabies." Still, the thought gave little comfort, and I lay awake for some time just staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I wasn't scared to look out my own damn window. At some point, sleep must have overtaken me, and I awoke later that day. The morning sun streaming through that same window. After a quick shower, I fed the boys and ate a light breakfast. The terror of the night seemed to be slipping away as the day brightened, and after a quick check of Shitlick's water, I decided to take Knick-Knack for a long walk in the forest. Putting on a light jacket, I grabbed up my keys and a small canister of bear mace. For the most part, black bears of the mountain were pretty much live and let live. But there were also cougars in the area. Rare, yeah, but when it came to the woods, my dad, who always carried his rifle, the same rifle that now hung over the fireplace, had always said it was better to be safe than sorry. On that front, I had to agree. But as far as I was concerned, bear mace was more than enough for a simple morning walk on a well-established trail. Heading out the door, I slipped on my shades, Nick and Knack bounding beside me. The day was bright and clear as we headed down the trail. A babbling brook ran beside us for a couple of miles before vanishing underground. This part of the forest seemed somewhat darker. The trees more interlocking overhead, spears of sunlight playing across the leaf-strewn forest floor. The air smelled of damp earth and last year's rotting leaves. Suddenly I felt very much alone, and I realized I hadn't seen another single human being along this particular trail. "Help me," a voice suddenly drifted on the wind, and I turned, the skin on my neck beginning to tighten, the flesh on my arms beginning to knot. "Please help me." The voice was that of a young girl, and was emanating from the base of a large, knotted tree. Both Nick and Knack had started to growl ominously. "Hello?" I called, even though I was afraid. I couldn't risk leaving the helpless child stranded in the woods. Slowly, I made my way over to the tree, noticing how the ground gave way. There was some kind of hole, maybe the opening of a small cave, but it was thick and overgrown with coarse bushes. Only darkness was revealed. "Hello?" I called again. "Please help me," the voice called again, but now it was the voice of a young boy. "Come closer," the voice begged. But now it had changed. There was a rasp to it, and I felt a sliver of ice crawl down my spine at the terrible longing in that voice. I was about to reply when I was suddenly pushed aside by a black blur as Nick dived headfirst down the hole in a fit of snarling rage. He was about halfway down when he let out a scream of pain and was dragged down into the darkness. Without a moment's hesitation, I ran to the hole, tearing my bear spray from my belt and kicking the thorny bushes to one side, hearing the desperate struggle issue from deep inside. "Nick!" I screamed, falling to my knees. A sudden warning hiss was followed by a waft of foul-smelling air, and a pair of yellow, glaring eyes stared up at me. With a scream, I triggered the bear spray down the hole. There was an inhuman screech of pain, and suddenly, Nick was there, scrambling up towards me, his eyes watering, his nose and mouth bloody and bleeding, and quickly I wrapped my arms around him and pulled him backward with all of my might, spilling both of us onto the forest floor. Knack was suddenly there, looking at Nick's bloody face as I scrambled to my feet. "Come on!" I yelled as I began to run down the trail, but Nick had collapsed with exhaustion. I suddenly saw that his heaving side was also bleeding. Turning back, I grabbed him and began to run down the trail, my heart beating hard, my body flooding with adrenaline, Knack covering our retreat. And last, we reached home, and I collapsed on the porch. My shirt stuck to my body, leaves and bramble in my hair. There was no time to rest as I unlocked the cabin door and gently laid Nick onto the sofa. I grabbed the fresh cloth from the kitchen sink, wetting it down, and hurried back, wiping a mixture of blood and bear spray from my face before addressing the wound on his side. "Please don't be bad. Please don't be bad," I prayed, wiping away the blood from his fur before letting out an explosive sigh. The wound was, thankfully, shallow. There were 4 of them, ragged, skin around them puffy and inflamed. "Claw marks," I shuddered. What was that thing that spoke in a human voice? It had claws, some beast, and malignant yellow eyes that glowed in the darkness. The rational part of my mind wanted to scream bear, but I knew it was no such thing. First it appeared at my window with the same yellow eyes, stood on 2 legs, and that obscene gesture licking at the glass as if in anticipation of an upcoming feast. I mean, I'd heard the myths and the rumors from the old-timers, the hunters, and of course the Native Americans that had once roamed free in these mountains. Bones of a beast that could take on many forms and lure unsuspecting men to their deaths with a childlike voice or with the voice of a loved one that it had formerly devoured. Skinwalker. I shuddered, feeling foolish the moment that the word left my mouth, and yet still deep in the root of my brain, that part that made us still fear the dark, I knew it to be true. Nick had stopped his violent shaking and was now gently lapping at his wounds. I went back to the kitchen and wrung out the cloth before soaking it again and cleaning his wounds. I repeated the process over and over again until I was sure it was properly clean. There wasn't much else I could do. Thankfully, the wounds were shallow and they'd stopped bleeding. I'd have to keep an eye on them for signs of infection or risk of heading down the mountain. I couldn't go. Not yet. Whatever that thing was, it had hurt my dog, just like Emma had hurt Mr. Fluffers and driven me out of my home. I convinced myself that I had left to teach her a lesson, to be the bigger person. But that shit wasn't true. I was hiding up here. I was hiding from her, hiding from my problems, running away. But not this time. This time, I would get some paybacks. And god damn it, I would make that bastard thing pay for hurting Nick. "What do you think, shitlick?" I said, looking over at my furry friend, who was once again uncaringly licking his own ass. "But we take the fucking thing down." He continued his grooming. "That's right," I said, grabbing up my father's rifle. Let's kick its ass. Let's kick its ass. Nick and Knack seemed to growl their agreement, and I busied myself securing the house and making arrangements for the coming night. When I was a kid, I watched a movie called Dog Soldiers. It was about a group of British soldiers held up in a cabin that was being attacked by werewolves. The movie was great. It gave me a few ideas. Already I had a couple of pans of boiling water on the stove and a homemade flamethrower made up of a can of hairspray and a Bic lighter close by. I had locked every door, closed the wooden shutters on every window, bar the one in the lounge area, hoping the creature would enter the cabin that way. There I would wait in the dark with my loaded rifle and take the bastard thing down. It was only after full dark that I began to wonder if an actual bullet would kill this creature of legend. Maybe I needed a stake of hawthorn or a silver bullet. I was starting to panic, starting to sweat, when there came a sudden crashing of glass and a splintering of wood from the bedroom. With a cry, I ran down the corridor just as the thing came crashing through the bedroom door. It was tall and impossibly thin, its skin gray and leprous, atop a long, thin neck with a bald head with glowing, malignant yellow eyes. It saw me and grinned, revealing a wide mouth filled with razor-sharp teeth. "Help me," it whispered. And I swear it was smiling as it suddenly fell on all floors and slowly slouched forward. I backed away, never taking my eyes off the crawling thing. which just started to babble all manner of noises issuing forth from its drooling mouth. One minute I heard the merry sound of songbirds, the next, the shriek of a mountain lion. Its smile grew louder as the sound of a sobbing, terrified child issued forth from its wrinkled muzzle. And its face seemed to be growing more animal-like with every passing moment. Still that terrible sobbing issued forth. Bastard thing, I growled, growing suddenly furious. How many innocent kids had this thing slaughtered? How many children's lives and voices had it stolen? Raising my rifle, I barked off a shot, hitting the thing high in its shoulder. Black blood sprayed, and it screamed in pain, falling over, kicking its legs in fury as it scrambled at its bleeding wound. Quickly, I tried to work the bolt of the rifle, but it was jammed, and the creature was already back on its feet. With a cry, I turned and fled for the kitchen. I was at the stove with the creature's claws sheared down my back. I screamed in pain, grabbed up a boiling pan, and tossed it over my shoulder. From behind came a deafening roar of pain as the thing reared back, its chest covered with smoking blisters. Desperately, I picked up the other pan, but the enraged creature batted it away, spilling the boiling content down my leg. And it was now my turn to scream in pain. Just then, a black blur came out of the shadows. It was Knack, who barreled into the creature, knocking it to one side as powerful jaws clamped onto one diseased, twisted leg. This gave me an opening as I ducked under the swiping claws, trying to work the stubborn bolt of my rifle just as Nick joined the fight. As I entered the lounge, there came a sudden yelp of pain, then another, and another as the creature shambled after me, both legs torn and bleeding, yet still it came, filled with a terrible vitality. Of Nick and Knack, there was no sign. I tried to slowly circle to the left, near the crackling fireplace, still working the bolt of my gun as the creature crouched down, ready to pounce, to tear me apart with its long, wicked claws. But suddenly, there came a squeaking from over near the window, and the creature's head spun around. It was Shitlick, running like a maniac upon his squeaking wheel. Without a moment's hesitation, the skinwalker lopped across the room, tore open his cage, and grabbed my hamster by the scruff of his neck between two claw-like fingers. Turning to face me, it grinned before laying back its scabrous head and opening its mouth impossibly wide. Shitlick squeaked and kicked his little pudgy legs as if in some rodent way he knew what was coming. "No!" I cried as the creature dropped him into its mouth, not even bothering to chew, swallowing him whole in a single gulp. It turned to me just as I freed the bolt, but suddenly, it stopped. Its glaring yellow eyes bulging as it frantically clawed at its throat, seeming to gag and heave. I didn't wait, but rammed the bolt home and drew a bead on the creature's heart as it desperately tore at its throat, black blood beginning to ooze. I barked off a second round, hitting the creature dead center. There was an explosion of blood, and the beast went down, as if pelaxiated. It lay still, all except for the skin around its neck. Something inside squirmed and twisted. With a cry, I drew my pocket knife and, fighting my repulsion, gently cut open the creature's rancid flesh. "Oh, thank God!" I cried as Shitlick pulled himself free, squeaking angrily. He even gave me a little nip as I gently picked him up and popped him back in his cage before he immediately got in the important business of sprinting on his wheel. Just then, Nick came limping from the kitchen. He'd seemingly bruised and battered Knack by his side. I later found out his front leg was broken, but over the coming months it healed nicely. He only walks with a small limp now. As for the creature, I dragged it outside and burned it to ash that very day, erasing its evil from the world forever. Shortly after, Emma and I got that divorce. I'm seeing a girl named Sally now. She's a veterinarian who obviously loves animals. She often watches Shitlick and says that he definitely has a problem. Maybe even a fetish. She says I'm obsessed with the little guy and I should write a book about him. And hey, maybe I will, but what do I call it? I know The Adventures of Shitlick and the Nick and Knack Gang. No, I know. The Adventures of Shitlick and the Nick and Knack Gang. Sounds like a winner to me. Back in the summer of '01, I had a part-time job at a retro-style arcade. I was 16 years old, had this long hippie hair that reached halfway down my back. The arcade was pretty run down, but it had a lot of customers. We were open 7 days a week. The location was a stone's throw away from a busy tourist beach. Though we had air hockey, pinball, and arcade machines, we made most of our money from snacks, drinks, and a small laser tag court in the adjacent building. There were never more than 2 people working there at a time. I was usually on cleaning duty. People dragged in a lot of sand. Machines got sticky from snacks, soda, and salt water. Not to mention the toilets. I mean, seriously, we won't mention the toilets. My cleaning bucket would need an exorcism at the end of every work night. It was my last summer on the East Coast. Dad got a job in some middle-of-nowhere town, so we were 2 short months away from uprooting our entire lives. I was depressed. I decided to keep my head down. No point in making friends when it was all going away. Then a particularly drunk tourist came in and broke our Elvira's House of Horrors pinball machine. We had to get something to replace it. It's a damn shame. 16-year-old me loved that machine for all the wrong reasons. My boss got us this new machine called Paperhead. It was a strange-looking machine with a black and white theme. Didn't play any music, but it had a lot of sound effects, like a lot. I rarely heard the same effect twice. It also had the largest screen of any pinball machine I'd ever seen. From the moment Paperhead arrived, we got a new regular in the store. Lizelle. While I'd been told that we were moving away, she just moved in. She was a Louisiana girl, my age. Big smile, even bigger glasses. She had this seemingly endless supply of coins in a fanny pack. She'd come in every now and then and just play and chat a bit. Got along surprisingly well. She started coming by in the off hours when no one was around, just so we could talk without raising our voices. She was crazy about Paperhead. Well, it was her favorite game, and her enthusiasm about it was intoxicating. She'd gush about the sound effects, the design of the obstacles, the scoring system, and the overall visceral flow of the game. She told me on multiple occasions that she was one of about a dozen people that read the rare instruction manual for it. She said it contained some background lore. Oh, she wouldn't tell me about it, though. That was her own thing. Thing is, I was playing pinball and arcade machines all day long. Whenever there wasn't anything to do, I was playing something. So when Lizelle challenged me to a pinball triathlon, I couldn't say no. If I win, you gotta tell me everything about this game, I said. All the lore, all the quirks, all of it. And you gotta tell me why you love it so much. And if I win, she countered, you're gonna owe me one, Cher. What do you mean, owe you one? Just, you gonna owe me one. Terms were settled. We shook hands. And we played. I crushed her on both NBA, Fast Break, and Terminator 2. Absolutely crushed her. But the final game was Paperhead, and there was no way she'd lose on that one. Still, I was in the lead. She'd have to break her personal record to get a total score better than mine. Problem was, she did. She destroyed me. She got in this rhythm where she didn't lose a single ball for I don't know how long. I had a customer waiting at the counter for a solid 10 minutes just because I had to stay and make sure Lizelle wasn't cheating. But of course she wasn't. She just knew the game, inside and out. The points she made in that one single game made up for losing the other 2 combined. It was ridiculous. Maybe the scoring was different. I don't know. But the cards were on the table. She won, and I owed her one. She didn't cash in on that favor, though. I mean, if anything, she was just happy to come back and keep playing. But little by little, our sessions playing grew shorter. We started to hang out at the arcade. We would talk for hours. There's one time I forgot to close, and we stayed up way past midnight talking about everything and anything, huddled away in the dark corner of a Jurassic Park light gun booth. I'll be the first to admit that I fell for that girl. I mean, it was the opposite of what I wanted. When my time was up, it physically hurt to say goodbye. I met her one final time at the arcade. Gave her a yellow lily as a parting gift. And she kissed me on the lips. We ended up making out by the Street Fighter Turbo machine. And to this day, I smirk every time I hear Hadouken. Had to end. But before it did, she gave me that one last reminder that someday she'll cash in on that favor I owed her. A deal was a deal. And from that point on, couldn't help but love pinball. But adult life doesn't have a lot of room for games, and the farther west we drove, the more distant grew the smell of a warm, sugar-sweetened beach. Lizelle was far gone. I had to move on. And even if I didn't want to, life would move on without me. A part-time job at the arcade made way for college. I got a bachelor's degree, then a master's. Got a job as a consultant for a natural gas extraction company, working 2 months at a time and being off for one. Difficult schedule, but I made so much money I didn't care. It was ridiculous. I could afford a house, as many cars as I could possibly want. Got a lot of attention for it. It's amazing how many flaws people are willing to overlook and even celebrate when they know that you can pay off their student loan in a couple of payments. The years were rough, though. I'm not going to go into details about my wife, how she turned into an ex-wife. We were together for 8 years. Thought we were going to have a kid. Never happened. It wasn't anyone's fault. It sucked. She took half of all I had. I almost went to court. Our families were torn apart at the seams. By the time we'd crossed into the 2020s, I was closing in on my 40s, and things were bleaker than ever. I'd worked my way into a respectable position at the company, had more money than I could deal with, but it's a weak comfort on those dark nights when your belly starts to pudge and your hair starts to thin. I mean, I'm no wreck, but you never stop thinking about your 20s, you know? It's one of those nights a couple years ago now that I got a message that I'd never anticipated. It's Lizelle. I have a hard time expressing how disoriented it is to have someone from that far back get in touch with you. It's almost like a fictional thing. Like if you get a call from someone from a TV show, it feels unreal, like you dreamt it up. But it was her. No doubt about it. Sure, she also closing in on her 40s. She'd exchanged her glasses for contacts, but her smile was as big as ever. I'm gonna cash in on that favor you owe me, she wrote. I don't know what else to do. I read that during my lunch break. I had to sit down. It was like a gut punch to the heart. Put a fire in me. She remembered me after all these years. Must have really made an impression. I mean, she certainly had made one on me, but it's always easy to imagine such things to go unreciprocated, especially when you're feeling down in the dumps. I sent her a message back. Still think you cheated, I wrote. That high score made no sense. Can't squirm your way out of this one, Cher. She was right. I couldn't. And hell, I didn't want to. It hit me like a truck that I still, after all this time, loved pinball. We chatted a bit that week, shared a couple of life stories, talked about the various twists and turns we'd ran into over the years. I had an ex-wife, she had an ex-husband. We could laugh a bit about it, but it was clear there was some scars along the way. Lizelle admitted that she needed my help. Her husband had gotten mixed up with some bad people, and some of them had come to her, demanding that she pay for his mistakes. Lizelle didn't want any trouble, but it had to end. She wanted to get out of this and move far away. Start over. I found a picture of the arcade when I packed up my things, she wrote. So it got me thinking of you. I feel dumb, but that summer meant a lot. It's not dumb, I wrote back. I get it. I don't want to be one of those people who show up when they need something. I want meaning. So, we got to talking specifics. Lizelle needed someone that she could trust to move things of hers. She had them in a rented storage space, but she was afraid that if she went to get it herself, someone might follow and grab whatever they could, or possibly harm her. So, if I could get it for her, she wouldn't have to worry. It wasn't anything illegal, a couple of keepsakes, work items. It'd just be a couple of boxes, and she would meet up to get it later. It seemed simple enough. Helping someone move is fine, but that costs nothing but time. I got an address and a time, and then I was on my way. It was a 3-hour drive, and across a state line. I'd borrowed a van from work. Lysel told me that it'd be enough. I left around lunchtime on an ordinary Thursday. By the time I was closing in on the storage space, it was almost dinner time. I figured I'd load it up, meet up with her, get her a bite to eat. It was just grunt work, but the thought of seeing her again made it all worth it. There were rows upon rows of these locked storage rooms. I had a number and a code for the lock. I drove by them one by one, finding the correct number at the very end of the second lot, tucked away in a corner. I parked, got out, went up to the door. 6-digit lock. It popped open, clattering to the ground. Lysel just mentioned didn't have a lot of items, but I could tell there was something out of the ordinary. 6 boxes, full of vacuum-sealed electronics, cables, and little mechanical components. I almost mistook it for some kind of toy at first, since there was a couple of neon-colored bits and bobs in there. About 6 boxes in total. After loading up the boxes, I turned my back to the locked door. I heard footsteps approaching. "Hey!" An upset voice called out. "What do you think you're doing?" I turned around. It was a man I'd never seen before. He had the kind of face that you wouldn't easily forget. A thick scar ran from his throat all the way up to the left side of his nose. His eyes were dark from lack of sleep, and he shaved his head, revealing cuts and bruises that had settled into ugly scars. Just getting some things," I said. Please keep your distance." "You with that lady?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. Lysel had people looking for her. I couldn't just give away who I was. But before I could come up with a clever answer, he pressed on. "The pinball lady, paperhead lady, you with her, aren't you?" I gotta go. I hurried to the driver's seat and locked the door. Before I got the keys in the ignition, there was a tap at the windows. He was holding a knife. "Hey!" he called out again. "I need to check those boxes. You're not going anywhere, you hear me?" I didn't answer. I just fired up the engine and rolled off. But not before he got a slash in, popping the left front tire. For a moment, I thought he'd fired a gun. I could hear him yelling at me all the way out of the parking lot. There was this ugly side coming from the front of the car as the tire struggled. I couldn't stop now. I'd have it fixed on the way back. I got in touch with Lysel. She gave me another address where she'd meet me, and we'd pick up the last of her things. She had a lot more things to move, but she'd get that from a couple of movers at a later date. These were just the immediate things that she couldn't risk anyone getting their hands on. It was a short drive, but my heart was still racing. That man had been serious about hurting me. I wanted to call the police, but not before talking to Lysel about it. She might not want me to bring attention to this. It's a strange feeling to be directly threatened. It's so primitive and raw. I made my way to the outskirts of town. There was an old house with a couple of loosened wooden panels clinging to the facade. It begged the question, what could she possibly want to get out of a place like this? She couldn't possibly live like this, so why were we there? I double and triple checked the address, and this was the right one. I parked, stepped out, and went out to the front door. I knocked. There was no answer. You could barely see a thing through the dilapidated curtains. The wooden steps leading up to the door groaned at even the hint of pressure. The place was probably crawling with termites. I made my way around the back when I found an open door. A thought struck me. The last time we met, I'd gotten her a yellow lily. I should get her something now, too. I looked around and saw these wild sunflowers by the tree line. They're a bit of a weird blue shade, but they were quite beautiful, so I picked one and entered, carefully. "Lysel?" I called out. "You here?" There was no response. I went further in, watching my step as I did. I could hear the hum of electricity, but it didn't make sense in context. This place didn't have a single solid light bulb, and definitely no TV or refrigerator. This was the kind of place homeless people broke into when they needed a place to stay. There were a couple of cables running up the stairs. Extension cables, I think. I followed them, calling out to Lizelle a second time. Hey, Lizelle? This time I heard a noise. Something to my left, up the stairs. I followed it. I entered an old office, at least that's what I think it was at some point. There was still what remained of a desk, split in two, covered in bite marks from desperate rats. But in the back of the room was a sight I'll never forget. Lizelle. She was absolutely gorgeous. Pictures and video couldn't do her justice. She was just as vibrant and cheerful as always. That smile. Those eyes. Took you long enough, Cher. I handed her the sunflower, and she couldn't help but grin. It seemed appropriate somehow. She leaned in and gave me an oh-so-careful kiss on the cheek. Not the kind of place I expected to find you in, I admitted. But a deal's a deal. A deal's a deal. She smiled back. So how about we get out of here? I didn't ask why she kept things at a place like that. There could be 100 reasons. I was distracted by her presence. Couldn't help myself. It was as if every rational, conscious thought just exploded out of the back of my head when I saw her. So I took down a couple of boxes and prepared myself to move something big in the back of the room. Lizelle pulled away a plastic sheet, revealing a fully functional, original, refurbished, and polished paperhead pinball machine. I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. The lights, the sounds, it was all the same. The same make and model as all those years ago. I couldn't believe it. I got it off an auction, Lizelle said. Took some time to restore it. So that's what was in those boxes of yours, spare parts? In a way, Cher. She nodded. That's work. I do mechanical repairs. Pretty specialized stuff. Expensive. I didn't even question it. I was mesmerized. It felt like someone lit a fire in my chest. I felt strong again. Awake. I had the most beautiful woman I'd ever met at my side, and I was right back there, playing pinball. Best feeling in the world. Lizelle had to finish up a couple of errands before we left, so I had to get this thing down on my own. She wasn't too worried, though. She knew it meant a lot to me. There were paddings that I could use to slide it down the stairs, and the legs were detachable. Be some work, but it could be done. As soon as she ran off, I got the tools out. I didn't mind her running around. She was a busy woman. I was just happy to see her again. I unplugged the machine, detached the legs, added the padding, and slowly got it down the stairs. It was a bit touch and go there for a while. The stairs were about to go out long before the machine did, but it made it down. And from there, I could put the legs back on and roll it out the front door. It was a hassle, but I did it. I kicked the front door open, pulled the machine out, only to be greeted by a familiar face. A scarred face. The same man from before. Still wielding a knife, he was standing between me and the van. He looked exhausted, like he'd been running. Get in the fucking car, he said, slowly. I nodded at him, and he nodded back. I stepped away from the machine, and he shook his head. He pointed at the pinball machine. That goes too. I loaded up the pinball machine and we got in the van. He got on the passenger seat, still holding the knife like his life depended on it. I couldn't help but notice. His hand was shaking. Keep following that street, he said, pointing with his free hand. I'm not going to let you hurt her, I said. That's not happening. I'm not going to hurt her. he scoffed. I'm gonna kill her. We drove to a secluded lake just outside of town, still thumping along from a popped wheel. He had me drive all the way onto the beach and put the car in park. The sun was about to set, casting the top of the birch trees in a burning light. The shadows grew longer. Roll it out, he said, pointing at the machine. I did as I was told. There was little I could do against a violent man with a knife, and I figured Lizelle would rather have me alive. I could reimburse her for the machine later. The scarred man pointed to the lake. Get to it. If you want to break it, you could just... No! You gotta do it right, he interrupted. Water's the fastest. Cooking it with a car battery won't work. Water's the best. Who cares? I mean, it's a pinball machine. She got you good, huh? He had me roll the entire machine into the lake. It was traumatic, seeing all that effort go to waste. Such an intricate machine, but I didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. I'm no knife fighter. All right, he sighed. Now we wait. For what? For her to give us the next location. I'm not doing this, I said. Hey, I'm not letting you hurt her. He turned to me again, this time with pity. He didn't understand what he was hearing. He shook his head, picked his teeth clean with a knife, leaning against the hood of the van. I guess you haven't figured it out yet. So he told me his story. This man, let's call him Kenny, he was a wanted criminal. It started a couple of years ago when he met a woman named Marley. She'd been involved with some bad people, and she needed his help to get out of that life. It had involved a series of escalating scenarios, starting with a couple of pickups, ending with armed assault, manslaughter, and premeditated murder. Love that woman, Kenny said. Loved her with all my heart. There was something wrong about her. He told me about this one time the power went out. He'd been sitting with Marley in the kitchen discussing their plans, then as soon as the power went out, she disappeared. Poof, he said, illustrating with his hands. Just like that. Gone. Smoke. Gone, I said, shaking my head. What do you mean, gone? Gone as in disappeared, he added. Gone. After that, he began testing her. He noticed how she would only appear if there wasn't too much noise, and only inside that one apartment. He never saw her leave it. He never saw her walking the streets or meeting him at a restaurant. She was always at home and only in the quiet hours of the night. She needed power. She didn't go far. She needed me to hear her. If a couple conditions weren't met, she didn't show up. I don't see how this has anything to do with me or Lizelle. That's what yours calls itself. Guessing she ain't no Jersey girl like mine. What do you mean, yours? I asked. Kenny pointed the knife at me, as if to drive home a point, squinted. There's no Lizelle, he said. There's no Marley. There's only that fucking pinball machine. The machine was named Paperhead. According to what he'd found, it was the creation of a company called Hatchet Software Incorporated. Only a dozen or so copies were ever made and distributed. There was no mainline production. Each machine was handcrafted. The name's not a reference to a game, but a game system, he said. It's like a head made of blank paper. You can draw and paint whatever the fuck you want on it. Same goes for the pinball game. It adapts to what you want to play. And it wants you to play more. Wants you to care about it and keep it safe. So they hired a woman to stick around the machines? No, you thick alabaster fuckwad. They are the machines. They work on some kind of supersonic level. The machine makes a noise, makes you see shit. Why do you think you could see her and hear her the best when it's quiet? You're kidding me. Oh yeah? He laughed. Why is she not here right now? She's getting ready. Bullshit, he scoffed. She's not here because she can't be here because her game is sinking to the bottom of the goddamn lake. I turned to the lake and felt my stomach sink alongside that machine. This man was insane. But if he wasn't, I just killed Lizelle. But then my phone buzzed. A text from her. She told me it was just one more step and then we were good to go. Kenny looked up. That's her? He asked. That's her, isn't it? It can't be, right? You killed her. Pushed her in the lake. No, you did. And no, that's not how it works. There's at least 9 other machines out there. I only got the first 2. 3. No. The hell do you care? I spat back. If you don't like it, just go. You don't think I fucking would if I could? You think she just lets people go? No, she has pictures. She has recordings, confessions. And when I say no, she put it all online. And here I fucking am. This is... what? Vengeance? It's goddamn vindication. He walked up to me, pressing the tip of the blade in my stomach, almost breaking the skin. I could feel a vein press against the steel of the blade as my pulse sharpened. She had me done way worse things to way better people. I don't need you. I want you to remember that. I think you'd have killed me already. Not a lot of time, he said. There's another machine and we're gonna go get it. She won't know this one's broken. I'm not getting dragged into this, I said, holding up my hands. You take the van, you do whatever. I'm gonna see her, the real her, the person, and we're leaving. Hell you are. He grabbed me by the neck and pulled me into the car, now aiming the knife at my neck. He needed me. Apparently, she could call, and if she did, he needed my voice. He also needed my phone to find out where she was at. I wasn't cooperating, but I couldn't do much without getting stabbed. We took to the road, and I looked for opportunities. Somewhere to crash the car, an officer to flag down, a highway patrol I could speed past, something, anything. But it was getting dark, and people were settling in for the day. Things like this didn't happen on ordinary Thursdays around these parts. I got directions to a hotel. Lizelle suggested we stay there for the night and leave in the morning. Kenny was happy about it. Apparently that meant she was confident enough to stay in one place. That meant there was a second paperhead machine. We got to the hotel and Kenny kept the knife hidden but firmly planted in my back, in line with my heart. He kept whispering these barely audible threats as if speaking more to himself than to me, telling me he'd cut me, bleed me dry, telling me how he'd have no trouble doing it, that he was already a dead man walking. An elevator ride later and we stepped out on the 6th floor. We walked past a curious man in his late 60s, but apart from that, no one bothered us. We headed straight for the room. I didn't know what to do. If she's a machine, how the hell could she book a room? I asked. She's had someone do it for her. Kenny said, before she changed the booking, it's just electronics. And the machine? How'd she carry it up there? Luggage. You can have him take it to your room. She could have had another flunky hook it up. There are more? They're at least, what, 18? What, you thought you were special? There's just no way, I said, shaking my head. No fucking way! We got to the room and I knocked. The electronic lock clicked open. Before I could do anything, Kenny pushed past me. I saw Lizelle sitting on the bed. She crawled away from him. Up the bed, she could immediately tell he was dangerous. Where are you hiding it this time, Marley? Kenny laughed. You stuck it in the bathroom or you keeping it downstairs? Lizelle looked at him. Then to me. As if hoping I could say or do something. I took a step closer, ready to intervene if need be. Kenny was kicking doors open, looking for the pinball machine. There's no way you're dumb enough to keep it up here, he said. You stashed it. You're pulling him in. You're sleeping with him tonight, huh? That's the plan? I don't know this man, Lizelle said. I don't know what he wants. The following minute was absolutely unhinged. Kenny kept talking to her, but she wasn't talking back to him. It's as if she heard something which I didn't. He could be asking her about the other machines. She would just shake her head. He'd scold her for lying, despite not saying a word. It looked so strange. Like I was seeing two conversations taking place at once. But finally, Kenny had an idea. He looked at Lizel. "Get away from the bed," he said. "Move to the hallway." She didn't. She moved around a little on the bed to get away, but she didn't leave. Kenny smiled and looked at me. "She can't leave," he said. "She can't. Signal's too weak. She must have a transmitter or something." Waving the knife around, he laughed. He laughed like he didn't know what else to do. Then he turned to her with an unsettling smile. "You're free to go. Go right ahead. Get up, walk out of here." I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe his lunacy could work in our favor. But Lizel didn't move. She stayed seated, looking at me with pleading eyes. I furrowed my brow, looking at her, then back at him. "Come on," I said. "We'll just go." But she didn't move. She just sighed and sat there. Kenny started talking out loud. "There's a Bluetooth speaker in here or something. There's gotta be. It's too weak. You can't simulate touch or smell with that, so she must be planning to." I fell forward as someone pushed me from behind. The old man we'd seen in the hallway entered the room, stepping right past me. He was holding a pistol with a sort of makeshift silencer. I saw Kenny's smile fade in the instant where he realized what was about to happen. Two loud pops! And he was down. But my eyes weren't on Kenny. They were on Lizel. In the moment where the gun popped, she flickered. In the span of a rushing heartbeat, I saw someone else sitting on that bed, a woman in her late 60s with her gray hair flowing down her shoulders. And there was no one there, and then, when the noise stopped, Lizel was just sitting there like nothing had happened. All in the blink of an eye. She locked eyes with me as her smile faded. The old man kept talking out loud as if he was having a conversation with an invisible third party. "Are you all right, Sarah? I'm so worried, Sarah. We have to call the police." Lizel looked me in the eye from across the room. I just wanted her to get up and walk away with me. We could leave. We could forget this nonsense. I waved her along, silently asking her to join me as I got up off the floor. She didn't budge. Without moving a muscle, she sent me a text message. "I'm sorry," it read. "I can't risk it." My phone buzzed. Notification after notification after notification. Files uploaded, video downloaded, images downloaded, emails, text messages, 1, 2, 3 separate phone calls going on at once. The thing was completely out of control and the battery ran hot. Before the screen blacked out, a single message showed, "No one can know." Looking up, Lizel was gone. I couldn't believe it. I just stood there like an idiot in disbelief. The old man was still talking to someone I couldn't see when suddenly the silent conversation shifted. "A criminal?" he said. "Accomplice? You sure? He seems like a..." He turned to me, his eyes narrowed as he raised a pistol. "It was the right call to make this, darling," he said. "You're right." I took one last look at Kenny. 2 shots in the head in quick succession. I'd never seen a dead body before. I jerked backwards as a shot went past me. I rushed down the hall, heading straight for the elevators. I pushed the button, but there was no time. It'd be too late. It was a matter of seconds. I turned to the stairs instead. I was lucky. For some reason, the elevator didn't move. If I'd stuck around, I would have been shot. I hurried down the stairs, a couple of lights flickering, a few burned out. She was trying to get me to trip. There was no way to tell for sure, but it just couldn't be a coincidence. I heard a door open above, but I was faster. I hadn't run like this for years, but with your life on the line, you don't care. Every cylinder is firing at maximum capacity. You forget to blink. Your breathing goes on so fast that it hurts your lungs. Then another door opened, this time on the floor below. I had to try something, so I got out of the staircase on the 3rd floor. The soft red carpet muffled my steps, but I could hear someone else coming from a corridor up ahead. I took a right turn, hoping to get away. The lights kept flickering. Walking past a cleaning cart with a battery-powered radio, I heard Lizelle. "Just stop for a moment," she said. "We can work this out." I slowed down, only to see a man rounding the corner behind me. He was holding some kind of solid steel meat mallet. His eyes were dead as night. I could see the intention without him saying a word. There was a woman getting out of her room in an adjoining hall. I didn't have time to hesitate. I grabbed her and pushed us into the room. I closed the door and held her mouth shut, apologizing profusely as I did. "Please be quiet," I begged. "He's dangerous. Please, just a minute." There was a moment of hesitation. I heard footsteps out in the hall and then someone talking. I heard a man saying, "Put that down!" And then a sudden cough-like scream. I just stood there holding that poor woman, listening as someone was beaten to death with a solid steel meat mallet. Looking over the room, there was a clock radio. It started to flicker. I had to get out of there. The footsteps went the other way as he kept looking for me. I let go of that poor woman, apologizing again, and left the room. I beelined for the staircase, praying I didn't see anyone else. At one time I was lucky, and I made it. I kept going down the stairs, listening for anything and anyone, down to the lobby. All the receptionists were calling to me as I passed. Someone told me that I had a call waiting. Others told me to wait. Others told me they had questions. The doorman held up a hand, asking me to wait. "Sir, I need you to stay right there." There were sirens in the distance. Looking back at the receptionists, I could see they were worried. One of them had taken cover behind the desk. They thought I was dangerous. What had they been told? Why were they keeping me? Flashing lights in the distance, growing closer. I took a swing at the doorman. He dropped to the floor, and I burst out the front door. Well outside, I overheard a man speaking on his phone. He was smoking a cigarette, looking at me as if it was the most casual thing in the world. "I see him, honey. I see him." I heard the click of metal as I ran. I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I was pursued, but not for long. I guess he still had something to lose. I made it into a crowd and disappeared down an adjacent street. I don't know how long I ran or how many blocks. I ended up in a park. There were still sirens going off in the distance. I stopped down by a river, wheezing for air. It was hard to wrap my head around what happened. None of it made sense to me. I heard a spark. Far from where I was sitting, there was an old battery-powered radio next to an empty glass jar, probably something left by a local fisherman. It clicked to life. First there was just breathing, 4, maybe 5 deep breaths, piling on top of one another. "No one can know." The voice was broken. Fragments of Lizelle and a dozen strangers, all packed into a kaleidoscope of noise. "I can't have you tell them." "We can work something out," I begged. We could figure this out." "You negotiate," it said. "Still, Sheriff?" My heart ached. She was still in there, one way or another. "I won't tell anyone," I said. "We could pretend it didn't happen." There was no response. The radio cut to an emergency news segment about an active shooter at a hotel downtown. The police were looking for the perpetrator, but they were still at large. They gave a description. It matched me. She must have done something. Called someone. Maybe that's why she used my phone. For fabrication and incrimination. I had to flee into the night. Leave everything behind. Later, I found out about the extent of the damage done. Messages had been sent from my phone to Kenny implying I was going to kill him. Threats. The date was all wrong. It looked manipulated. I'd never sent him a message about anything. This was just a way to implicate me in the murder. There were other things as well. Messages hinting at drug trafficking, sent to known criminals, using lingo that even an intermediate DEA agent could crack. I was framed for a handful of serious crimes, which, all in all, would put me in jail for decades. In a confined space like that, Paperhead could get me without even trying. So I retreated into the backwater woods of my hometown. Got away from the electronics, the batteries, lights. And for a long time, that's been my story. I recently got a hold of a laptop so I could get this out. Once this is posted, it goes in the fire. I just wanted to put this out there to someone somewhere. Maybe you'll realize you're doing what I did. Looking back at it, I'm surprised I didn't put two and two together sooner. Whenever I was close to that game, she would interact with me more directly. Her signal would be so strong, she could simulate physical sensation. The Paperhead machine was incredibly powerful, and for a while, I thought there were only 9 of them left. But Kenny had been wrong. It's not just 9. By now, they're well over 40. Vicel's been keeping busy. Remember those boxes that I picked up? Turns out they weren't just spare parts, they were development kits. Using those kits and donor machines, she's managed to up the numbers of machines substantially. I could feel my luck running out. It's not easy living out here. I was thinking about going back to her, begging for forgiveness. Once I'm done with this, I could prove my loyalty somehow, maybe. She still reaches me at times. I can hear her in car radios in the mall parking lot, traffic lights, they shift colors. She has these little tendrils everywhere, and even things that don't usually pick up or resonate with sound has started to do so. Her influence is growing. I don't know what to do next, or how to feel. But despite all the pain and the fear, there's one thing that still hasn't changed. Maybe it never will. In a way, despite it all, I still love pinball. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. Once again, my book is available on Amazon. It is the Creepypasta Collections Volume 1 and Volume 2. They're always available if you guys want to check those out. Some of my favorite authors that I've worked with over my career are published in this book. I've curated all of it as well as written the foreword. I hope you guys enjoy it. Check it out. It's in the link in the description down below if you ever want to find out more. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me over at Patreon. That's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. I cannot thank you guys enough. Thank you guys so much for being supporters. That goes for everybody who was down in the description, as well as AcidSystem, BallarmsTheRat, Blake Rattler, Mendoza, Brenna, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, Chainsmoker Dealer, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, CronutHobo, CrusaderChocobo, CursepoxPrimarch, Dakota Best, Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Kraus, Ellie Hutmire, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Gemma, Halsey, HIDive's nephew, himbojerry, Hour Minute Seconds Time, Jay Keems, Jed Pet, Jordan Humble, King Crab, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Old Penguin, Peaceful Buddha, Psychomel, Red Shadowcat, Remember the Sun, Rinku Star, Salty Surprise, Samara Line, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sullyman, Tali Sue, the Chavez Brothers. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and sweet dreams.